and subscribe.
And now, it's story time.
They say if you stare into a campfire long enough, you'll start to see shapes in the flames. But in the forests of Arkansas, those shapes sometimes stare back. Some campers claim they've seen figures standing in the fire's glow, figures that weren't there before. And when the fire dies, well, that's when the real horror begins. Tonight, you'll hear their stories. And after that, you might never go camping there again. Are you brave enough to listen? Subscribe and turn on notifications, if you dare. Story 1. My name is Luke Holloway. I was 36 years old when all of this happened, back in late September of 2023. I'd sold off most of my belongings, packed up my truck, and driven into the Ozark National Forest in Arkansas to find something I thought I needed. Peace. Maybe even redemption. Instead, I found hell. I grew up in Little Rock. My parents divorced when I was still a kid, and I bounced between them until I was old enough to leave for good. Over the years, I struggled with drinking and pills. Lost jobs, lost friends, managed to straighten out, but I never shook off the sense that I was incomplete, that my life was a constant echo of mistakes. I kept telling myself, if I could only get away, live off-grid, do everything myself, maybe I'd find peace. That's how I ended up buying a small plot of land deep in the Ozarks, at the end of a rutted dirt track no one bothered to name. When I arrived, it was late afternoon. The cabin was old, nothing more than a one-room shack with a sagging porch, but I felt a flicker of hope. My dog, a blue heeler mix named Rufus, jumped out of the truck and started sniffing the perimeter. He was always a good judge of character, of places as well as people. If something was off, he'd let me know. He didn't bark that first day, so I took it as a good sign. I had a few run-ins with the locals in the days following my move. Not many folks lived out there, but a ragged-looking man named Jeremiah Pruitt, Jed for short, stopped by on my second morning. "Got new blood around here," he drawled, leaning against one of the porch posts. He looked about 40 or so, wiry build, sun-beaten face, a paranoia in his eyes that set me on edge. "Name's Jed," he said, extending a hand covered in calluses. "Heard the hammering and figured I'd say hello." We talked over the squeak of my porch steps while Rufus eyed him warily. I told Jed about my plan, live off the land, find myself. He took off his hat and let out a dusty chuckle. "Used to think the same way. Been out here near about 10 years, he muttered, a wild glimmer in his eyes. "Seen things. You watch yourself, Luke Holloway. Sometimes these hills got a life of their own." I chalked his words up to superstition, or maybe too many lonely nights in the woods. Either way, I thanked him for stopping by, and he left. I noticed, though, that he kept glancing over his shoulder on the way out, like he was expecting something to come bounding out of the forest at him. That was the first sign. I just didn't know it yet. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a routine. Sunrise, I'd gather water from the creek, do basic maintenance, chop wood. Early afternoon, I'd hunt or forage. By sundown, I'd be in bed or reading by lantern light. I slept better than I ever had in the city. Rufus seemed at peace too, dozing by the corner of the cabin every night. The first truly strange thing happened a month in. I came out one morning to find strange symbols burned into the cabin's outer wall. They looked like spirals inside circles, done in a thick charcoal that left the wood blackened. No footprints, no sign of anyone else around. I asked Rufus, as if he could answer me. "You see anyone out here last night?" "Boy?" He just lowered his head and whimpered, snout pointing at the woods. I grabbed my shotgun and spent half the morning combing the perimeter. Found no tracks, no scrap of clothing. Probably some bored local kids, I told myself, but my gut churned. That afternoon, I drove to the nearest gas station, a good 40 minutes away, to buy more supplies. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with a toothy grin, told me I shouldn't be living so far out alone. Some folks do it, she said, but they see things, hear things. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press her. A couple of nights later, I was jolted awake by Rufus barking like mad at the front door. Heart hammering, I grabbed the shotgun. No headlights outside, no glow of a lantern, nothing. Just darkness. But Rufus would not calm down. I flung the door open and caught a glimpse of someone at the tree line. An old man, wearing tattered overalls and a wide-brimmed hat. Even from that distance I could see his eyes, faintly reflecting the moonlight. Two smoldering embers in the blackness. I yelled something stupid like, "Get out of here," but the figure just tilted his head and grinned. Then he vanished into the shadows, unnaturally fast. I stood on the porch for a while, shotgun shaking in my hands. Rufus paced back and forth, whining. Eventually, we went inside, barricaded the door, and I sat awake until the first streaks of dawn. That was the night I started to realize my old reasons for coming here, to find peace, had crashed into something else entirely. The next morning, I decided to check in with Jed. I'd scribbled down directions to his place, though they amounted to something like, turn at the Crooked Oak, go 2 miles, watch for the rusted mailbox. I found his cabin half hidden behind a ridge. Smoke from his chimney told me he was home. Jed answered the door with a rifle in hand, blinking at the daylight like a caged animal. His place smelled like old wood and sour sweat. He had jars of pickled vegetables lining dusty shelves, and every window was covered with a layer of grime. I told him what happened, about the symbols, the old man at the edge of my property. His expression darkened. "You saw old Leland," he muttered under his breath. "Who's old Leland?" I asked. Jed's eyes darted around the room as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Some folks call him the devil. Not quite a ghost, not quite a man. He's been around these hills forever. Way I heard it, he shows up when folks have got darkness in 'em. Feeds on it." He swallowed hard. "I ain't saying I believe all that, but I do." It was insane, right? The devil in the Ozarks? But something about Jed's tone, the haunted look in his eyes, made me listen. He leaned in. "You gotta be careful. He'll test you, twist your mind. I've seen neighbors go mad, heard their screams in the night, and them local authorities." He spat into a corner. "They ain't no help. Some folks say they're in on it." I left feeling uneasy, but at least I wasn't the only one who'd seen something. Rufus stayed close the entire trek back. That evening, I took extra care to reinforce the door and windows. My cabin was hardly Fort Knox, but it was better than nothing. 3 days passed quietly, almost too quietly. Rufus slept calmly, and I started to wonder if it was just my imagination. Then, as I went to fetch water from the creek one afternoon, I found something I'll never forget. I spotted a weathered campsite in a small clearing. A tent collapsed, half covered in leaves. The stench was unmistakable. There was dried blood on the flap of the tent. Inside were sleeping bags, clothes, a battered cooler. The cooler was still latched shut. Morbid curiosity compelled me to open it. I wish I hadn't. Inside were slabs of rotting meat. Could have been venison. Could have been something else. My stomach churned as I scanned the area for footprints or any sign of the campers. There was none. I hurried back to the cabin. That night, every little noise outside made me flinch. The wind in the trees, the crack of branches in the distance, the flutter of bats overhead. Each one sounded like footsteps, or like breath in my ear. At dawn, I drove to the nearest town, an unincorporated speck called Cass. to report the abandoned campsite. That's how I first met Sheriff Alan Boggs. Sheriff Boggs was a large man in his late 50s, a thick mustache and a permanent scowl creasing his tanned face. He listened as I described the scene, nodding slowly, occasionally jotting down a note on a little pad. "Son," he said with a folksy drawl, "we'll check it out. But you gotta remember, folks out here are rough. They hunt, they drink, they fight. Sometimes people get hurt. Ain't always a big mystery." I pressed him. "But there was blood. It smelled terrible." "We'll look," he repeated, giving me a long, searching stare. "You got a phone at your cabin, Luke?" I shook my head. No landline, no cell reception. "All right, keep your nose clean. If we find something, we'll let you know." He turned away, already looking bored with me. It gave me a bad feeling, as though my words were going to vanish into some filing cabinet, never to be seen again. The next night I was woken by a loud banging. I jumped out of bed, heart in my throat, shotgun in hand. Rufus barked like crazy. I threw the door open to find Jed on my porch, half sobbing, face smeared with blood. He stumbled inside, collapsed into my wooden chair, shaking so hard he could barely talk. "He's in my head," he whispered. "Can't shut him out." "Jed, what happened?" He pulled up his sleeve. Deep scratches gouged his forearm, likely done by his own nails. I saw him. Old Leland, in my cabin. Woke up and he was at the foot of my bed, smiling. The walls, they were bleeding, Luke. Dripping with blood. I tried to calm him down, telling him he might be hallucinating, or maybe it was some trick. But a part of me believed him. Rufus paced the floor, ears flattened as if expecting something else to barge in. Jed's eyes darted to my shotgun. Then he muttered, "I can't let him take me." Before I understood what he meant, he grabbed my shotgun off the table. "Jed, wait!" I lunged, but he shoved me back with a strength I didn't think he had. The barrel went under his chin. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then he pulled the trigger. I froze, ears ringing, blood spattering across the old plank floors. My mind went blank with shock. Rufus howled and I staggered backward, nearly toppling onto my bunk. Minutes passed before I could move. My best guess was that Jed had gone insane from fear. Maybe he thought that was the only way out. I wrapped his body in an old tarp, dragged him outside, and dug a grave behind my cabin, tears burning in my eyes the entire time. In the darkness, I prayed for him. I'd never prayed in my life, but I did that night. I barely slept. Sometime around dawn, I found myself standing over Jed's makeshift grave, still holding the shovel. That's when I noticed it. The loose dirt had shifted. Just a bit, like something within was trying to move. My first panicked thought, he's alive. But that was impossible. I'd seen him pull the trigger. Still, my blood went ice cold. I edged closer, ignoring the pounding in my chest. The dirt rippled, a bulge forming. Then it went still. I scrambled back inside, locked the door, and spent the morning curled up in a corner, muzzle of the shotgun aimed at the door. I told myself it was some weird trick of the mind, maybe an animal tunneling. I knew, though, deep down, I knew that Jed's soul wasn't resting. By midday, I forced myself to see if the grave was disturbed. It wasn't. No footprints, no sign of animals. It was as if my imagination had conjured everything in the pale light of morning. Still, I couldn't deny what I'd seen in that moment. I was spiraling. Days blurred. My supplies were running low, but I was too afraid to drive back into town. Every night, I barricaded the cabin, set lanterns by the windows. Rufus seemed equally on edge. Sometimes he'd stare at the door and growl for no apparent reason. On the fourth night after Jed's death, I heard a sound outside, scraping, like nails against the walls. Then came a moan, low and drawn out, so filled with sorrow it made my skin crawl. I mustered the courage to open the door a crack, shotgun ready. A silhouette stood at the edge of my property near Jed's grave. My eyes adjusted to the starlight, and I saw it was Jed. He was naked, mud-caked skin stretched tight across his frame, a gaping wound where the shotgun had done its work. Yet he was upright, moving. He stumbled a few steps closer, arms jerking like a marionette. I slammed the door shut, sank to my knees, and covered my ears, but I still heard him. "Luke, Luke, you let me die." A wet, gurgling voice not quite matching the living Jed's. Something started thudding against the door. Bang, bang, bang. I fired once through the wood. The thudding stopped. By the time I found the courage to open the door again, there was nothing. Just the scorched symbols on my cabin, the quiet hush of wind. No blood trail, no footprints. Enough was enough. I had to leave. Before dawn, I loaded Rufus into my truck, grabbed what I could carry, and sped down the rutted track, nearly blowing out a tire on the rocks. I didn't care. I had to get out of those woods. I made it as far as the old county road when I saw flashing lights ahead. Blue and red. Sheriff Boggs' cruiser. Relief washed over me. Foolish relief. I rolled down my window. "Sheriff!" I shouted, panic cracking my voice. "There's something out here. Jed's dead. He killed himself in my cabin, and he's out there walking around." Boggs looked at me calmly, then raised his hand in a signal. Two uniformed men, probably deputies, stepped out from behind his cruiser. They aimed their rifles at me. "I'm sorry, son. We can't let you leave," Boggs drawled. "What?" I stammered. He opened my door, yanked me out. One of his men grabbed my keys, the other brandished zip ties. Rufus growled, but with a quick jerk of the rifle, they forced him out of the truck and into a cage in the back of the cruiser. "You folks, you don't know what's going on out there. You gotta help me," I shouted. Boggs spat on the ground. "We know exactly what's out there," he said quietly, "and we can't afford you stirring up a panic. This forest has secrets, always has. Best you keep quiet." I kicked and struggled, but they forced me into the back seat of a second vehicle. From there, we drove deeper into the forest until the road was more ruts than anything else. Finally, they ordered me out near a lonely clearing, a place that felt like it didn't exist on any map. They removed my restraints and shoved me down onto the ground. Boggs gave a curt nod to his deputies. "Show him," he said, voice devoid of emotion. They led me to a pit, hidden behind a cluster of boulders. The smell hit me first. Death. So overwhelming it forced bile up my throat. The bottom was filled with bodies in various states of decay. Some fresh, some long rotted. Men, women, possibly children. I lost count because my vision blurred with tears. "That's what happens to folks who don't follow the rules," Boggs said. "So unless you want your bones down there too, you'll stay put and keep your mouth shut." He and his men climbed back into their vehicles and drove off, leaving me with a battered flashlight. No weapon, no dog, no water, just my horror for company. I stumbled for hours, dehydrated, half insane from what I'd seen. By nightfall, I collapsed near a small trickle of a stream. I drank greedily, ignoring the metallic taste. My limbs screamed in pain. My mind drifted in and out of memory. Jed's last words. The old man in overalls. Old Leland. The devil himself, if Jed was to be believed. At some point, I saw a figure approach with a flashlight. I tensed, ready to fight, but it turned out to be a park ranger. He wore a green uniform, wide-brimmed hat. The name patch on his chest read Bolton. Relief surged through me. "Help me," I croaked. "Sheriff Boggs, he kidnapped me, took my dog. There's a pit of bodies." Ranger Bolton frowned. "Easy, friend. Let's get you somewhere safe." He guided me to a small service hut about a quarter-mile away. Inside was minimal gear, a radio, some first aid supplies. My legs shook with exhaustion, so I sank to a bench while he rummaged around for water. "Thank God," I sighed. We have to call for backup. The FBI, the state police, someone who'll do something." Bolton turned. The expression on his face was wrong, like he was wearing a mask. "Now, Luke, we both know how this goes," he said. Voice lower, raspier. "This is my domain." I jerked upright. "Wait, how do you know my name?" His eyes flickered. In a split second, they went from warm brown to a blackness that seemed bottomless. "You saw my sign on your cabin," he said, voice twisting into something layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. "You saw me at your window. You heard me in the woods. Old Leland." My heart hammered and adrenaline surged. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy flashlight, ready to defend myself. Bolton's body jerked unnaturally, limbs contorting. "They all feed me, Luke. The fear, the blood, even Jed. Especially Jed." He took a step closer. I swung the flashlight, connected with the side of his head. He stumbled, let out a guttural snarl, then turned back, spitting black bile from his mouth. I didn't wait. I scrambled out the door. He, or it, came after me. Footsteps heavy on the wooden floor, scraping nails on the doorframe as he chased me. I dashed into the trees, ignoring branches that cut at my face, ignoring the burn in my lungs. I heard the ranger's laughter in the distance, echoing through the forest. But he was slower now, wounded or maybe not entirely stable in the host body. As the sky lightened, I realized I was nearing my own cabin again. Smoke drifted above the tree line. My heart sank, imagining it was on fire. But the closer I got, the more I realized it was someone else's fire. I followed the smell of burning. When I arrived, the entire cabin was engulfed in flames. I collapsed to my knees, tears springing to my eyes. Everything I owned, gone. My dog, no, wait, Rufus wasn't inside. Sheriff Boggs' men had taken him. I crawled to a safe distance, the heat pressing against my face. That's when I saw movement, a figure inside the flames. It looked like Jed. He was just standing there staring at me with hollow sockets. Then, in a blink, he was gone, replaced by the swirling inferno. In shock, exhausted, I staggered back into the forest. Hours later, maybe half a day, I found a lonely stretch of dirt road. To my surprise, an unmarked SUV was parked there. 3 men in dark suits stood around, scanning the area. One approached me, speaking with authority. "Sir, we need you to step away," he began, then paused when he saw my condition. "What happened to you?" I told him everything, disjointed, half sobbing. He exchanged a look with another suit. Then they ushered me into the back seat. One asked for my name, scribbled notes on a pad. The other seemed to speak softly into an earpiece. I realized they were federal agents when I caught the badge of the one nearest me. FBI. Relief flooded through me. Finally, someone with real power to stop this. I told them about the campsite, the pit of bodies, Sheriff Boggs' involvement, the monstrous figure I knew as Old Leland. They listened intently. Then the man with the pad looked at me sympathetically. "We'll take care of this, Mr. Holloway," he said. "You'll be safe now." He stepped away to confer with the others. I overheard fragments. Containment. Media blackout. Can't let this get out. Before I could fully process, a black helicopter soared overhead, disappearing beyond the tree line. The men guided me into the SUV, and we drove toward the local station. Instead of taking me inside, they parked behind it. 2 of them vanished into the building, while the man with the notepad stayed with me. "Can I have some water, Av?" "Please," I rasped. He gave me a bottle from a cooler. It tasted stale, but I was too thirsty to complain. I asked, "What about my dog, Rufus? Sheriff Boggs took him." The agent nodded as if he'd heard it all before. "We'll do what we can." Eventually, the other agents returned. One passed a sheet of paper to the notepad man. I saw him glance over it, nod, then he turned to me. "We're going to place you in protective custody while we investigate. You'll be transported out of state for your own safety." Relief, gratitude, and a strange sense of doom all washed over me at once. Part of me wanted to trust them, but my gut reminded me how much was at stake, how deep this thing might go. If old Leland truly was the devil, or something akin to it, would the FBI even matter? We drove out of the county. I sat in the back seat, half numb, battered, and silent. Just before crossing the state line, the SUV pulled over at a rest stop. The agent next to me stepped out to make a call. Moments later, a second black SUV roared up, and the men exchanged a few brief words. One pointed to me. The next thing I knew, they were telling me, "Wait here." Another agent took the driver's seat, a man wearing sunglasses. He glanced back at me, gave a tight smile. "Let's go, Mr. Holloway." He started the engine without any further explanation, and the other agents disappeared. We drove on in silence. I asked a few questions, where we were going, if they'd found Rufus, but he didn't answer. Just stared at the road, expression unreadable behind the tinted lenses. 30 minutes later, the SUV veered off onto a quiet side road. We passed a sign reading "Road Closed." Maintenance. The vehicle came to a stop near a row of tall pines. The agent turned to me, removing his sunglasses. His eyes were black as pitch. The same hollow void I'd seen in the Ranger. His voice was layered, rippling through the confined space. "There's no escaping, Luke. Not for you, not for your dog, not for anyone." In a panic, I lunged for the door. It was locked. He slid over the seat like a snake, pinned me down. I felt inhuman strength in his grip. My vision blurred as adrenaline flooded my body. I managed to shove him away just enough to scramble across the seat and unlock the door. I tumbled out onto the dirt, rolled, and came up running. I expected him to burst out, chase me, but when I glanced back, the SUV was empty. The driver's door hung open, no sign of him. I spun in circles, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Every nerve in my body was on fire. I don't know how long I wandered. Hours, maybe. Possibly a full day. At some point, I found a highway with real traffic. Semis roaring past, out-of-state license plates. I flagged down a startled couple in an old pickup. They took one look at me, filthy, bleeding, wild-eyed, but something in them recognized my desperation. They didn't ask many questions, just gave me a ride to a nearby motel. I checked in under a fake name, paying with the last of my cash. The clerk stared at me, wide-eyed, but said nothing. I spent the night in a locked, windowless room, the only light from a flickering lamp. My entire body felt bruised, and my mind wouldn't stop replaying the horrors of the forest, the pit of bodies, Jed's reanimated corpse. I fully expected to wake up to the FBI, or the local police, or old Leland himself. But dawn came quietly, and for a moment I believed I was finally free. It's been several months since that day, and I'm back in Little Rock, renting a tiny studio near the interstate. I don't have a job. I'm too paranoid to settle. I still don't know what happened to Rufus. The thought of him locked in some cage, or worse, tears at my soul. One morning, I found a piece of mail slipped under my door. No return address, just my name, spelled correctly. My hands shook as I opened it. A single slip of paper fell out with neat, precise handwriting. "You can never leave, Luke." Rufus, lying by the couch, started growling, his hackles raised. I felt a presence behind me, in the corner of the room where the light didn't quite reach. But when I turned, there was nothing there. Just a shadow that looked vaguely man-shaped for a heartbeat before dissolving. That's when I realized, old Leland, the devil, whatever name I pin on him, he's still with me. Maybe he's been with me all my life, feeding on my guilt, my darkness. Maybe that's why I went to the Ozarks in the first place, drawn like a moth to the flame. I haven't slept well since. Every time I close my eyes, I hear Jed's broken voice. I see the pit of bodies, the rotting campsite, the black-eyed ranger, and I know that someday, whether I stay in the city or run back into the woods, I'll have to face him again. The worst part is not knowing how many others are entangled in this nightmare. Sheriff Boggs, the FBI, the entire Ozark Forest, it's all part of some living, breathing evil that defies logic or law. The only truth I know is that I can't escape him. Not truly. I can only wait, gun loaded, dog at my side for the next knock on my door, the next grin at the edge of the trees. Because if old Leland wants me back, he'll find a way, and I'm not sure I have the strength to deny him a second time. Story 2. My name is Derek Miller. I'm 27 years old, and this happened in August of 2023. I've spent countless nights thinking about how I'm even alive to tell this story, if I'm truly alive at all. I'm not sure what people will believe, but I need to get this down. I need to speak it out loud, or it might swallow me whole like that Arkansas swamp nearly did. I was on a road trip from northern Texas to Little Rock with my girlfriend Emily Carter and our friends Travis, though we called him TJ, Johnson, and his girlfriend Jessie Lopez. TJ and I had been buddies since high school. He'd done a short stint in county lockup for small-time burglary. I joined the Marines straight out of school, coming back with a chunk of PTSD that followed me everywhere. Emily, who's 25, works freelance photography gigs and lives for abandoned places and ghost towns, always carrying her camera around her neck. Jessie, 26, is a nursing student, naive, caring, and the last person I ever thought could hurt anyone. We should have been on a straight line to Little Rock to catch a music festival. But TJ, always the thrill seeker, convinced us to take a detour through Boggy Creek. He'd read about it on some online forum full of urban legends, stories about a red-eyed preacher who preached to the dead. Emily was intrigued, I guess, and Jessie was too polite to say no. Me, I just wanted to keep my mind off bad memories from my days in the Marines. The ride in was fine at first. The roads were winding, and tall cypress trees rose out of waterlogged ground, giving the place an eerie beauty. But the deeper we drove, the worse the GPS got. It sputtered in and out until it started showing random nonsense. Emily tried her phone. Same issue. No signal. TJ shrugged, saying we'd find the main highway again eventually. We spotted a rundown gas station off the side of the road. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, attracting fat moths that slammed into the bulb with dull thuds. A skinny, wrinkled attendant stood behind the counter, not even looking up when I stepped in to pay for gas. He just muttered, "Don't stay in Boggy Creek after dark. You won't like the congregation." I tried to pry a little, asked him what he meant. He just shook his head. His eyes were wet and wide. Then he looked at me for the first time and said, "Lost souls always find their way here," in the weirdest tone. It was enough to make my stomach knot. We should have turned around, but TJ brushed it off. "Local superstition," he said. "They love freaking out strangers." Emily wanted photos of the swamp, so we pressed on. She was in the passenger seat, leaning halfway out the window, snapping pictures. The swamp seemed to close in around us, the road becoming narrower until we were practically scraping branches on both sides. A thick hush settled over everything. My mind started drifting back to nights on patrol overseas. The stillness felt like the lead-up to an ambush. That's when I noticed we'd passed the same broken-down sign for Old Creek Diner twice. I stopped the car and asked if anyone recognized it. TJ said we were definitely going in circles. Jessie started complaining about feeling sick, which wasn't like her. She was always the calm one, the caretaker, but she looked pale, sweaty. We decided to turn back, but the moment we tried, the engine died with a faint cough. TJ jumped out, popped the hood. Nothing obvious. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Emily tested her phone again, but there was zero signal. Even the radio gave us only static. That's when something else came through, just for a moment. A voice so deep it rattled my chest, whispering, "Lost souls always find their way home." Then the static returned. A sinking feeling told me we were in deep trouble. I needed to keep it together for Emily's sake. She was strong-willed, but I knew how quickly fear can unravel you in a place like this. We decided to walk. The road was nothing but cracked asphalt overgrown with weeds. In the distance, we saw what looked like an old wooden church. The doors stood open, candles flickering inside. Jessie said her head hurt, but TJ coaxed her along, arm around her shoulder. Emily took some pictures of the church from afar. We must have been about 100 yards away when the smell hit. Something rotten, like meat left out in the sun too long. I looked off to the right side of the road, where the swamp water was thick with algae. My stomach lurched. Partially submerged in the muck were bones, human bones, tied to a gnarled cypress trunk, mouth stitched shut with black thread. I couldn't even speak. Emily started snapping photos, but her hands shook so badly I wasn't sure the images would be clear. Jessie turned to retch by a bush. TJ muttered, "Holy, this is messed up, man." We backed away, and the stench seemed to follow. A moment later, a figure appeared in the open doorway of the church. He wore a faded black suit, slick with mud at the hem. Even from a distance, I could see he was too tall and thin, like someone had stretched him out. But the most terrifying part, his eyes. They shone red, like embers in a dying fire. "Welcome," he called out. "We've been waiting for you." I felt Emily grab my arm. TJ let out a nervous laugh. "Nope, no way," and turned to leave. But Jessie lurched forward, looking almost hypnotized. "Jess?" TJ said. She mumbled something about needing to see inside, that it was calling her. The moment she said that, the church bell rang out. A dull, metallic clang that made my skin crawl. We yelled for Jessie to come back, but she was already heading up the porch steps. I rushed forward to grab her, but the tall man with the red eyes blocked my way. "Please," he said politely, "the sermon is about to begin." For a second, I thought I was back in Afghanistan, pinned down by enemy fire. My heart hammered like it would explode. I wanted to push him aside, but a voice in my head whispered, "Don't touch him. Don't do it." "Jess, get back!" TJ shouted from behind me. He tried to force his way past the preacher, but the man didn't even budge. TJ might as well have slammed into a brick wall. The preacher smiled, revealing teeth too white and too sharp. Jessie disappeared inside. Emily grabbed my hand and whispered, "We have to get her." So I mustered the courage, locked eyes with the preacher, and took a step forward. To my surprise, he stepped aside, gesturing for us to enter. TJ and I exchanged a look. He gave a shrug that said, "I guess we don't have a choice." We followed Jessie in. Emily came close behind. Inside, the church was lit by hundreds of half-melted candles. The pews were full, except the congregation wasn't alive. Corpses dressed in moth-eaten Sunday best sat propped up, eyes hollow, bodies at various stages of decay. The smell forced me to gag into my sleeve. Emily gasped, snapping another photo out of reflex, though her hands were trembling. At the front of the aisle stood Jessie, knees on the bare floor. She wasn't looking at the preacher. She was looking at the largest corpse in the front pew, a man in a tattered gray suit, missing an eye and half his jaw. Her lips moved as if she were repeating something. "Jessie?" TJ said, approaching. He bent to put a hand on her shoulder. Before I could blink, she spun around. Her eyes had turned inky black, and her face twisted into a grin I'd never seen her make. She was strong, impossibly strong. She grabbed TJ by the throat, lifting him until his feet dangled in the air. "TJ!" Emily screamed. I rushed to help, but Jesse flung him aside with one hand, sending him crashing into a pew. The wood splintered, and TJ coughed, choking. I was about to tackle her when she moved faster than any human should. She pinned TJ to the pew by his neck, her nails digging into his skin. He looked at me, eyes pleading. "What have you done to her?" I yelled at the preacher. He didn't answer. He just watched, smiling like a proud parent. Jessie opened her mouth, and a voice that was not hers came out, low and growling. "She belongs to the faith now." With a burst of motion, she twisted TJ's neck. The crack echoed off the church walls. Emily shrieked and I froze. TJ was dead before he hit the ground. His eyes, still open, stared at the ceiling. The entire congregation of corpses seemed to shift in unison, as if they were leaning in to watch more closely. "Run!" I shouted, pulling Emily with me toward the door. Jessie, and that thing inside her, let out a sharp, rasping laugh. The preacher didn't try to stop us, just gave a slight nod as if saying, "Go ahead, try." We burst out into the swampy air. The sun was down now, the sky tinted a bruised purple. My mind spun. TJ was gone, snuffed out in seconds by the woman he loved. Emily sobbed, her breath ragged. I forced myself to keep moving, to think. We sprinted for the main road, but that's when we saw them. Figures in black suits, all tall and gaunt like the preacher, blocking our path. Moonlight caught their eyes, which glowed the same dull red. I tugged Emily's arm, veering off into the swamp. The ground sucked at our shoes, and mosquitoes swarmed our faces. In the distance, I heard that church bell toll again. Jessie's laughter, low and guttural, echoed through the trees. The stench of rot returned, and we stumbled upon more remains hanging from the branches, bones carved with strange markings. We pressed on until we found a relatively dry patch of land. Emily collapsed, sobbing. I held her close, my heart pounding. We had no idea where we were, no idea if those creatures were following. My brain screamed, "Find help, find something." I spotted headlights along a dirt path maybe half a mile away. "Come on," I whispered. "Let's head there." We struggled through the undergrowth, ignoring the cuts from thorny vines. Eventually, we found an old single-lane road with a row of black SUVs parked along it. Men in dark windbreakers with FBI printed on the back were milling around. I almost cried with relief. "Over here," I shouted. One of them turned, shining a flashlight on us. A tall agent, clean-shaven with a stony face, stepped forward. "Sir, ma'am, are you injured?" Emily sobbed, telling him we'd been attacked, that TJ was dead, that Jessie was possessed. The agent's eyebrows flicked up. He motioned for another agent to come over. They took us aside, tried to calm us down, but something was off. They had that same vacant expression I'd seen at the diner, polite but unblinking. Another agent walked past carrying jugs of gasoline toward the direction of the church. I realized they weren't there to rescue anyone. "These people," the first agent said, "were probably squatters in an abandoned building. Are you sure about what you saw?" I started to protest, but he cut me off. "Let's get you taken care of." His voice was too level, too controlled. Two other agents appeared, wearing gloves and holding thick plastic zip ties. Before I could react, they grabbed Emily, twisting her arms behind her back. "What the hell?" I screamed. I lunged at them, but the tall agent smashed the butt of his rifle into my stomach. I doubled over, gasping as they yanked Emily away, her eyes wide with terror. The agent knelt beside me, leaning in close. His breath smelled like stale coffee. "There's nothing here," he said. "Nothing but an old condemned church. No need to cause a stir, right?" My mind spun. This had to be a cover-up. I remembered the local stories about missing persons in Boggy Creek, the rumor that nobody ever found the bodies. I tried to stand, but pain lanced through me. Suddenly, Emily twisted out of the grip of one agent. She grabbed the rifle from his hands with surprising ease and pointed it at me. At first, I thought she was aiming past me, but then I saw her eyes. They were black, like Jesse's. "Emily," I whispered, stepping backward. I wanted it to be a trick of the light, but she bared her teeth, staring at me with a cold hatred. "I can hear the preacher in my head," she said, her voice trembling like multiple chords at once. Then she lunged forward, jamming the rifle barrel into my gut. I felt a searing pain explode as she pulled the trigger. The agents shouted, "Scattering." I collapsed onto my knees, clutching the wound. She crouched next to me, that twisted grin stretching her lips. "The sermon isn't over." Then she stood and walked calmly after the agents, who were already stumbling over themselves in terror. I lost sight of her as my vision blurred. My next clear memory is seeing flames in the distance, orange and flickering as the FBI set the church ablaze. I don't know how long I lay there in the mud, drifting in and out of consciousness. Eventually, I felt hands on me, someone dragging me. I heard hushed voices. Through half-shut eyes, I spotted the gas station attendant from earlier, crouched over me. He pressed something against my stomach, trying to stop the bleeding. I was too weak to resist. He whispered, "You should have turned around." Then darkness swallowed me. When I woke, I was propped against a tree at the edge of the main road. The dawn light was filtering through the cypress trees. My side felt stiff from dried blood, but the wound had been crudely bandaged with strips of fabric. The church was still burning, thick smoke curling into the sky. FBI vehicles were gone. No sign of Emily, TJ, or Jesse. Nothing but the distant crackle of fire. I stumbled back to the old diner, hoping maybe anyone could help. Good. I found the door locked, the interior empty. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, with dusty tables and no signs of recent use. It made no sense. Eventually, a young hiker in a pickup truck came by. He saw my bandages and shock and rushed me to a hospital in the next county. I told the nurses about the church, the preacher, how the FBI had taken Emily. They looked at me like I was insane. A local sheriff came by and listened, shaking his head. "We'll check it out," he said. I knew they wouldn't find anything, and they didn't. A few days later, once I was stable, men in suits arrived at the hospital, FBI, or so they said. They told me TJ, Jesse, and Emily were missing, and that I was the only survivor of a vehicular accident near Boggy Creek. They told me not to worry about anything else, to get better. Then they left as quickly as they'd come. I was discharged with nowhere to go and no one to call. The bank of evidence I had was Emily's camera, which had somehow ended up in my bag, but the memory card was wiped. All that's left is this story, my ragged scar, and the nightmares that jolt me awake at night. In those nightmares, I see red-eyed figures standing at the foot of my bed, beckoning me to attend the midnight sermon. Sometimes I can still hear Emily's voice echoing. The sermon isn't over. I've told my story to a few people. Most shake their heads or roll their eyes. But if you're reading this, please heed my warning. Boggy Creek isn't just another backwoods legend. Whatever hunts there, whatever that preacher and his congregation truly are, they're real. And there are people in high places who seem determined to keep it hidden. If you ever find yourself on that winding road, if you see an abandoned church, if you catch a glimpse of a tall man with red eyes smiling from the doorway, turn around. Get back in your car, drive as far and as fast as you can. Because, believe me, once the sermon starts, it never really ends. Story 3. My name is Alex Carter. I'm 33 years old, and this happened in October 2021. At the time, I was fresh off a string of personal disasters, quitting my investigative reporting job after a story went south, losing the sense of stability I'd built in the city. The only companion who stayed faithfully by my side was my German Shepherd, Bruno. I was desperate to get away from everything, so I planned a trip into the Ozark National Forest in Arkansas. If I'd known what awaited me in Devil's Hollow, I never would have gone. I set out on a clear, brisk morning. The roads leading to Devil's Hollow wound past rolling hills, dense green forests, and rocky outcroppings. The place looked wild and untamed, exactly the kind of isolation I craved. I'd read a few things about the Hollow, mostly local legends, rumors of vanishings, and hints of something unexplainable haunting the area. The name alone piqued my journalistic instincts, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. People love to spin yarns about remote places. I parked my old SUV near an overgrown trailhead, slung my backpack on, and whistled for Bruno. He hopped out, nose twitching with excitement. The forest stretched out before us, a labyrinth of tall pines and hickories. In the distance, you could hear a creek bubbling through rocks. It felt calm, peaceful even. The first sign something was wrong came about an hour after we started hiking. We were still on a faint trail, and Bruno kept pausing, ears perked, scanning the trees to our left. I thought maybe it was a deer or a fox. Then, suddenly, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. It was as if the wind died mid-breath. The forest went so quiet that my own footsteps seemed unnaturally loud. For a moment, I thought I heard a faint cry, like a woman's voice somewhere far away. I told myself it was the wind through the pines. We pushed deeper. Eventually, the path opened into a small clearing next to a dry creek bed, and I decided this would be our first camp. By then, it was late afternoon. I pitched my small tent and prepared for a quiet evening. Bruno sniffed around and whined occasionally, but I wrote it off as him adjusting to the unfamiliar smells. In the back of my mind, though, I couldn't shake that strange hush in the air. That was when I met Ethan Graves. I was rolling out my sleeping pad when I heard twigs snapping. Bruno growled, protective, so I immediately got to my feet, heart hammering. Out of the tree line stepped a man in his late 40s, wearing a faded camouflage jacket and carrying a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Howdy," he said, lifting a hand in greeting. "Didn't expect to see anyone camping this deep in here." I relaxed, just a little. "I'm Alex," I said, trying not to sound rattled. "This is Bruno. We're just taking some time away from civilization." He nodded, eyes lingering on my gear. "Name's Ethan. I hunt in these parts. Bit unusual for folks to come to Devil's Hollow on purpose, especially alone." "I've heard the stories," I admitted, "but I guess I'm not easily spooked." He gave a short laugh. "Well, if you're looking for peace, maybe pick a different spot. Devil's Hollow can be temperamental." Something in his voice put me on edge. It wasn't exactly threatening, more like an unspoken warning. But he started to guide me on some local lore. How the land was rumored to be cursed after settlers and indigenous people clashed violently centuries ago. How sinkholes swallowed entire cabins back in the 1800s. I let him talk, a small part of me taking mental notes for any future article I might write. He tipped his hat and started back into the woods. "You take care, Alex. Be careful where you set up camp, though. You don't want to be too deep in the hollow after dark." Bruno watched him go, still bristling. I tried to tell myself that Ethan was just a cautious local, maybe a bit paranoid. Yet the uncomfortable knot in my stomach didn't loosen. Something felt off about him. Or maybe about this place. I didn't know which yet. That night, the forest's silence became suffocating. No crickets, no nightbirds, just a low breeze whispering through the pines. Around midnight, Bruno woke me with a soft whine. I unzipped the tent and shone my flashlight toward the tree line. A scream rent the air, so sudden and piercing that I dropped the flashlight. It sounded like a woman in mortal terror, distant yet echoing off the trees. My heart lurched. Bruno flattened his ears, trying to scramble out of the tent. I grabbed his collar. "No, boy, stay." The scream died as quickly as it had come. I held my breath, waiting for something to follow. Footsteps, rustling leaves, a cry for help. Nothing came. The night fell silent again, but it was a deeper kind of hush, like the forest had collectively stopped breathing. I sat there wide awake until dawn, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I'd covered countless crime scenes in my days as an investigative journalist. Screams were not foreign to me. But there was something about that sound that made my skin crawl, like it didn't belong to any living person. When morning came, I packed up camp, intending to move on. A part of me wanted to leave altogether, but I also felt a surge of stubbornness. I'd come here for solitude, for clarity, and the old reporter in me wanted to know where that scream came from. As I traveled deeper, the terrain grew rougher. The vegetation was denser, the trails less defined. By noon, the warm sun cut through the canopy in scattered rays. I found a trickle of water, what was left of a creek, and decided to follow it. Occasionally, the faint smell of decay drifted by, like something rotting in the underbrush. Not 30 minutes later, Bruno started barking frantically. He rushed ahead, nose to the ground. When I caught up, I saw what had him spooked, a decayed journal half buried in the mud. The pages were damp, smeared with dirt. My curiosity flared, and I carefully flipped through it. Most of it was illegible, but the few words I could make out were chilling. Her scream. I keep hearing it. She's whispering my name. I saw her reflection in the window. Why won't anyone believe me? My pulse pounded as I read. Was this from someone who'd heard that same scream? What happened to them? Bruno whined again and pulled me forward. We crested a small ridge and stumbled onto what remained of a collapsed cabin. The roof had caved in, and blackened wood jutted out like broken bones. The stench of rot hit me full in the face. Then I saw the body, a woman lying half in, half out of the rubble. She wore hiking boots and clothes that looked a few months old, maybe more. Her limbs were twisted unnaturally. The worst part was her face, frozen in an expression of absolute terror. Her mouth open wide like she'd died mid-scream. I covered my nose and mouth, trying not to retch. This was no simple accident. The scratches on the nearby wood suggested she'd tried desperately to escape something. My mind reeled, trying to piece together a rational explanation, but the evidence offered none. I noticed a small bag near her waist. Inside was a driver's license for one Moira Keene. This was a missing person. I'd heard vaguely about a woman gone missing in the Ozarks a while back. So this is where she ended up. It took all my resolve not to flee right then. I'd reported on gruesome crimes before, but seeing this out here in the wilderness, with no one around for miles, made it horribly personal. I felt an old spark flicker inside me. The reporter's drive to uncover the truth. I couldn't just walk away. Maybe I could at least document the scene with my phone, contact the authorities once I had signal. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught a flash of movement in the shards of a broken mirror propped against the decaying cabin wall. In its reflection, I saw a woman standing behind me, gaunt and pale. Her eyes black hollows and her lips parted in a silent wail. I spun around. No one was there. The forest stood empty. My hands shook so badly I dropped the phone. When I picked it up, the reflection was gone, but the uneasy feeling remained, like a cold hand gripping my shoulder. Bruno barked again, ears flat. That was the final push. I needed to get out of there. I decided I'd find a more accessible route back to my SUV, maybe drive into the nearest town and report this. But as I retraced my steps, I ran into Ethan again. He was crouched near a tree, checking a hunting snare. "You all right?" he asked, noting my pale face. There's a body, a woman in a collapsed cabin," I managed. "We need to tell the authorities." Ethan's expression flickered, a momentary look of fear or guilt, hard to pinpoint. I warned you not to go exploring, he said quietly. Devil's Hollow is cursed. You never know what you might find. This isn't about curses, I snapped, anger pushing aside some of my fear. A woman is dead. We need to... He raised a hand. Don't you worry. I'll help you out. Let's get you to the road first. Then we'll figure out how to alert the sheriff. Despite every instinct telling me to be cautious around him, I was exhausted, rattled. And if he truly knew the area, maybe he could get us out faster. So I agreed. We walked side by side with Bruno trailing close. Ethan led me to a narrower path that followed the contour of the hills. But after almost an hour of walking, I realized we weren't heading north toward where I'd parked. We were going deeper, the vegetation growing denser, the silence heavier. Wait, I said. Where exactly are you taking me? He paused. The tension in his posture was unmistakable. There's a shortcut, he said gruffly, but we have to go through a part of the hollow that, well, it's not the safest. You'll need me to guide you. Bruno let out a low growl. I tightened my grip on his leash. Something was definitely off. I think I'll find my own way, I told Ethan, stepping backward. That's not wise, Ethan replied, steel in his voice. There are things in these woods you can't face alone. My gut twisted with alarm. He was blocking the path. For a moment, we just stared at each other, my mind racing for what to do. Then, in a blur of motion, Ethan swung his rifle around. He didn't point it at me directly, but the implied threat was clear. I had to bring someone, he muttered. If not you, then me. That's the deal. I stood frozen. Deal with what? His face contorted with fear and desperation. I don't know what she is, but she leaves me alone if I bring her others. You shouldn't have come here alone. For a split second, time seemed to slow. Then Bruno lunged, teeth bared, and latched onto Ethan's arm. Ethan howled, dropping the rifle, which skittered across the ground. I sprang forward, adrenaline pounding. I grabbed the rifle, fumbled, and felt Ethan's elbow connect with my shoulder. Pain flared, but I managed to scramble out of reach. Bruno kept up the attack, snarling as Ethan tried to shake him off. Finally, Ethan landed a desperate kick that forced Bruno to let go. Before Ethan could recover, I snatched the knife from his belt. With trembling hands, I drove it into his side, more out of raw survival instinct than any conscious intention. Ethan staggered, collapsing to his knees, eyes wide with both pain and terror. Blood seeped through his jacket. You have no idea what's coming, he rasped. She'll find you. I backed away, chest heaving. You brought this on yourself, I whispered. The wind shifted, and there it was again, that scream, echoing through the trees. Except this time, it wasn't distant. It sounded impossibly close. Ethan's face went ashen. He clutched at his wound, letting out a ragged breath. Then, before my eyes, something yanked him backward into the undergrowth with a force that shouldn't have been possible. He screamed once, a single, awful cry that cut off abruptly. Leaves and branches rustled. Then everything fell silent. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it might burst. Bruno whimpered, pressing against my leg. We had to run. I lost all sense of direction in my panic. We tore through the woods, branches scraping my arms, the terrain turning more jagged. The forest seemed alive with an almost predatory intent, pushing me deeper, keeping me from finding a way out. Every time the wind gusted, I thought I heard that wailing scream. Eventually, exhausted, I found myself by a crumbling stone foundation that looked like it had once been a small church. The half-fallen walls and rotting pews inside suggested it had been abandoned decades ago. I stumbled in, chest heaving, trying to collect myself. The space smelled of damp wood and mildew. A single beam of daylight pierced the broken roof. Then I noticed the noose hanging from a rafter, swaying slightly even though there was no breeze inside. It looked old, the rope rotted in places, but that didn't lessen the impact. My mind conjured horrible images of what might have happened here. Bruno's ears went flat. He let out a low growl, gaze fixed on something behind me. I turned, and that's when I felt ice-cold hands grip my shoulders. They were slender, corpse-like. I couldn't see them, but the sensation of frigid fingers digging into my skin was unmistakable. A voice, faint and echoing, whispered my name. Alex. My vision blurred. A suffocating dread overwhelmed me. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. The last thing I registered was the sight of a woman in ragged burial cloth standing at the edge of my peripheral vision. Her mouth was open, the edges of her lips cracked and blackened, as though she had screamed her voice raw centuries ago. Then everything went dark. I regained consciousness lying face down in the dirt. It was almost dark outside, the sky a deep purple. My head throbbed and my shoulders felt bruised. Bruno was nowhere in sight. Panic hit me in waves. "Bruno!" I called, voice hoarse. The only response was an echo bouncing off the trees. I stumbled to my feet, fighting dizziness, and staggered out of the old church. The forest had grown eerily still again. The dryness in my mouth felt like chalk, and my limbs were shaky. Hours must have passed. I forced my feet to move, calling for Bruno as I went. Darkness crept in, making the forest even more menacing. My flashlight flickered, the batteries dying. I cursed under my breath. Every rustle of leaves made me jump, half expecting that spectral figure to appear again, or Ethan to come lunging out of the shadows. But neither did. At some point, the land sloped downward and I recognized a faint trail. It was a small miracle, but I followed it, pushing through exhaustion and the rising terror over Bruno's disappearance. An overwhelming sense of emptiness gnawed at me. If I lost him too? Then, up ahead, I saw headlights flickering through the trees. Stumbling forward, I practically fell onto a dirt road. A pickup truck was parked there, its engine idling, headlights casting long shadows. Relief flooded me. Maybe I could get help. A figure stepped out, Sheriff Curtis Doyle, according to his uniform. He was older, in his late 50s maybe, with graying hair beneath his brimmed hat. "Whoa there," he said, catching me as I stumbled. "Easy." I must have looked half dead. "Sheriff, there's a body in a collapsed cabin. There's a man out here. He tried to kill me. And there's something else. My dog is missing. We need—" "It's all right," he said, patting my shoulder. His tone was calm but oddly detached. "Let's get you to the station. Get you patched up." I nodded, too drained to protest. He helped me into the passenger seat of the truck and the warmth of the heater hit my aching body. I told him everything in a rush. Finding Moira Keene, the journal, Ethan's betrayal, the screams. He listened without interrupting. Occasionally, his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, scanning the forest behind us. When we arrived at a ranger station, a small building with just a couple of rooms, he guided me inside. I half expected to see other deputies, or at least a radio operator. But it was empty. He ushered me into a back room, telling me he'd get some medical supplies. Something about the arrangement felt wrong. I stood there, scanning the walls. No normal posters or official bulletins, just blank paneling. Then, out the window, I spotted a battered old pickup behind the building. My heart skipped a beat. It looked like Ethan's truck. Before I could process, Sheriff Doyle reappeared. "We'll see about that woman's remains," he said in a careful tone. "But I want you to take a breath and consider that maybe you got turned around. Might have seen things that weren't really there." I stared at him. "I know what I saw." He gave me a thin smile. "Look, people go missing around here sometimes. They wander off trail, have accidents. The official reports explain most of it." He paused, like calculating his next words. "You sure you saw a body?" "I have photos," I countered, remembering my phone. I grabbed for my backpack only to realize it was gone. I must have dropped it while running or after blacking out. My stomach sank. "Don't you worry," Doyle said, voice low. "We'll let folks know you're safe. But the rest—" He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. The rest would be quietly buried, just like all the other strange disappearances here. Anger rose, cutting through my fear. Why would you cover this up? That woman, Moira Keene, she deserves justice. So does— He grabbed my arm, not hard, but firmly enough to make me realize I wasn't free to leave. Devil's Hollow has its secrets, and that suits the people around here just fine. Something roams these woods. We can't do a thing about it except keep outsiders from stirring it up. I wrenched free, heart pounding. My eyes flicked to the door, but Doyle casually placed himself between me and the exit. Just then, a tortured howl echoed outside. My breath caught in my throat. It sounded like Bruno. I had no time to think. I ducked past Doyle, shoving him aside as he grabbed at my sleeve. I burst through the station door into the cold night. The only light came from a single street lamp near the parking lot. The rest was shadow. "Bruno!" I shouted. Another howl answered, closer this time. I ran toward the sound, ignoring Doyle's angry shouts behind me. Past the lot, the trees loomed in the darkness, forming a natural barrier. A flicker of movement. Then I saw him. Bruno was limping. Fur matted with dirt, but unmistakably him. Relief flooded me as he pressed against my legs. A second later, a chilling wail tore through the air. This time, it was so piercing I felt it in my bones. I clamped my hands over my ears, trembling. Bruno backed up, growling. Then, a shape materialized just beyond the station's dull glow. A ragged figure, arms elongated, head tilted unnaturally. The same gaunt woman I saw in the reflection. Her features were skeletal, eyes sunk in pits, jaw slack and trembling. As she moved, it was like her feet didn't touch the ground. Her gaze fixed on me. Behind me, I heard Doyle shout, "Get away from her!" But I couldn't move. The banshee, Moirine, or whatever she was, let out another eerie moan, and for a heartbeat, I could see the raw, infinite sorrow in her hollow eyes. She wasn't alive. She wasn't dead. She was caught in some dreadful in-between, fueled by the agony of those who died here. Suddenly, something bright lit up the night. Doyle had grabbed a flare from the station supply. He tossed it toward the banshee. The sparks glowed red in the darkness, and the banshee recoiled with a shriek that rattled my teeth. Her form flickered like a dying flame. Then she vanished into the shadows. For a moment, Doyle and I just stood there, gasping for breath. Bruno pressed close to me, trembling. The sheriff wiped sweat from his brow. "That's about all we can do," he said, voice hollow. "Drive it off for a while, but it'll come back." I wanted to scream at him, to ask how he could accept this horror. But then he sighed and gestured to his truck. "Take it. Go. I know you won't rest until you report this. Just remember, some truths don't want to be found." I didn't question him. My priority was to get the hell out. With Bruno beside me, I got into Doyle's truck and sped off, half expecting him to shoot out a tire. He didn't. Maybe he was just exhausted from the charade. Maybe he realized that covering up Moira's death and the others had become too heavy a burden. The road was an endless ribbon through the trees. Eventually, I found an old county highway, and from there, I followed it until I reached signs of civilization. A small diner's neon lights felt like salvation. I pulled in, my entire body shaking. Bruno rested his head on my lap, as if to ground me. Over the following days, I tried to report what I saw. I contacted local authorities in the nearest town. They listened politely, took down notes, and promised to look into it. But news never came. No mention of Moira Keene's body in the local papers, No word of a man named Ethan Graves. It was as if that entire nightmare had been swallowed by the forest. I moved on, physically at least. I left Arkansas, found a small apartment in another state, and tried to return to normal life. Yet my sleep was plagued by nightmares. The decaying face of Moira, Ethan's desperate eyes, the banshee's shriek echoing in dark corridors. Bruno, too, would jolt awake at night, whining softly. I checked the local obituaries for any mention of new missing hikers. A few popped up, but they were all deemed accidents, chalked up to the wilderness. Part of me wanted to drive back, demand an investigation, but I knew it would be futile. The Hollow protects its secrets, and those complicit in it ensure those secrets stay buried. Then, one night I woke in my cramped apartment to the sound of a low whistle of wind. My heart pounded, goosebumps prickling my arms. Something felt off. I crept to the bathroom, flicked on the light, and stared at my reflection in the mirror, sweaty hair plastered to my forehead. Behind me, the shadows in the hallway flickered. For just an instant, I saw her, Moirine, the banshee, draped in her decayed shroud, standing silently. Her lips parted as though to speak my name. I whipped around, heart hammering, but nothing was there. The hallway was empty, yet the sense of dread lingered. And in that moment I knew I hadn't escaped. The Hollow's mark was on me, and she, the thing that haunted it, might follow me for the rest of my days. I wish I could say this ends with me finding peace or justice, but some stories don't end cleanly. The terror of Devil's Hollow endures, silent and unrelenting. I can only hope that whoever stumbles into that place next heeds the warnings, if they ever get them. Or, perhaps, like me, they'll learn too late that once the Hollow has your name, it never truly lets you go. Story 4. My name is Elias Carter. I'm 38 years old. This happened in late December of 2023, deep in the Bayou Meadow Wildlife Management Area in Arkansas. I've told this story a dozen times, and it only sounds more insane each time. But every word is true. I used to work on oil rigs off the Gulf Coast. Dangerous, loud, and lonely work, but it paid well. I married young, thinking money would hold the pieces of my life together, but it didn't. A bitter divorce followed a few hard years. In the end, I decided to walk away from the world. I wanted stillness and solitude. That's how I came to build a ramshackle cabin on a small patch of dry land hidden in the swamp. Bayou Meadow is a sprawling wetland, thick with cypress and water oaks. Fog drapes it morning and night. It's a place where you can lose yourself, willingly or not. You can also lose your mind. I had been living out there for a year when everything went wrong. I'd grown accustomed to the quiet. No neighbors for miles. Just me, my German Shepherd Ranger, and the ever-present buzz of mosquitoes. Every now and then, I'd head into the nearest town for supplies, minding my own business. Folks in town mostly gave me curious looks. A man living off-grid wasn't exactly normal to them. I had one real acquaintance, Jonah Marks, a local trapper with wild eyes and a wiry frame. He wore the same tattered camouflage jacket every time I saw him, and he was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. Courtesy of an alligator or so, the rumor went. He was the only person who didn't seem to mind a hermit like me. "Suits me fine, living alone," he would say. "Too many devils in the world anyway." We had an unspoken understanding. We avoided each other unless necessity demanded otherwise. The first real sign that something wasn't right arrived on a damp, gray afternoon. Ranger and I were out checking my lines for catfish along a narrow waterway. I walked downstream, scanning the cypress knees, hoping to find a decent catch to fry up. Halfway around a bend, Ranger started growling, the hair on his back standing straight. I saw the carcass of a deer strung up high in a tree, as if someone, or something, had hung it there like a trophy. The eyes were missing, and the body was dried out, the hide pulled taut over the bone. It looked unnatural, like it had been drained. I stood frozen, my gut telling me this was no accident of nature. Ranger wouldn't go near it. He whimpered, tail between his legs. After I managed to calm him, we returned to the cabin. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The image of that deer haunted me. The next morning, while I boiled coffee over my tiny wood stove, I heard a voice outside. A woman's voice, so close that it made me drop my tin cup. "Eli," it said. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I'd told a precious few people my name. I rushed to the window. Fog blanketed the clearing around my cabin. No footprints, no figures, just the low hum of insects. By noon, I'd managed to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe a leftover dream. But as soon as the sun dipped below the trees, I heard it again. A soft, whispery tone calling, "Eli, Eli." Ranger bristled at the door, growling low. My blood turned to ice. I shouted, "Who's there?" Silence. I flung the door open, rifle in hand, but found nothing but muddy tracks on the porch. Tracks that looked webbed, more like an alligator's hind paw than a human foot. I decided to go into town the next day to report the deer carcass and the footprints to the sheriff. That was my first mistake, trusting Sheriff Dale Henshaw. He was a tall, wiry man with deep-set eyes and a permanent scowl. Everyone in town knew he was on the take for something. The rumor was he collected bribes from poachers and drug runners. But who else was I supposed to tell? I told Henshaw what I'd seen. He leaned back in his chair, gave me a bored look, and scratched at his jaw. "Deer die in the swamp all the time," he said. "Gators drag 'em up into trees or they get snagged." "Gators don't hang deer like that," I replied, struggling to keep calm. "Well, I'll send a deputy out there someday," he said dismissively. "You should keep your head down, Carter. Ain't good to poke your nose into every little thing around Bayou Mito." It was clear I wasn't going to get help, so I left. On my way out of town, I ran into Jonah. He asked me what had me so rattled, and I told him about the footprints. Jonah's face paled. "Eli, you best keep away from that deeper swamp," he whispered. "There's something out there that don't like being seen." I wanted answers, but Jonah just shook his head. Then he slipped away between buildings like a ghost. I drove back to my cabin with a pit in my stomach. A few days later, I stumbled upon trouble of a different sort. I was scouting a new area for fish traps when I found a labyrinth of cypress that formed a kind of natural tunnel. I'd never been that far into the swamp before. As I paddled, I caught sight of something unnatural. Tarpaulins stretched over wooden frames, half hidden by brush. Then I saw a makeshift pier loaded with plastic barrels. A small motorboat was moored there. 2 men stepped out, each carrying shotguns. They saw me at once, and there was no turning back. One of them, a lanky fellow with greasy blonde hair, aimed his shotgun. "Stop, right there," he barked. His brother, shorter, with a wild look in his eyes, racked the slide of his own weapon. I raised my hands, heart thumping in my throat. "Name's Eli Carter," I said, trying to sound calm. "I live near here, just scouting for fish. Didn't mean to trespass." "You got no business here," the taller one snarled. "This is our territory." I'd heard rumors of drug operations in Bayou Meadow, but I never wanted to meet them face to face. These men had to be the Wilkes brothers, Caleb and Seth. Word in town was they cooked meth or processed who knows what out in the swamp. "You see anything you shouldn't?" Seth asked, eyes narrowing. "Don't even know what I'm looking at," I lied. "I'll go." They exchanged a glance. Caleb lowered his gun a hair. "You stay off this water," he warned. "Otherwise, you won't make it back." I didn't say a word. I paddled away, my back prickling, half expecting buckshot to tear through me at any moment. Once I was a safe distance off, I guided the canoe back to my cabin. I felt a strange relief, thinking, okay, that's the real threat. Drug runners, not ghosts or swamp witches. I was wrong, of course. That night, a storm rolled in, lightning revealing shapes in the swamp. The rain hammered my tin roof, and the wind howled. Sometime past midnight, Ranger started barking like he'd gone mad. I jumped up, grabbed my rifle. Lightning flashed. Through the window, I saw something floating on the water near the bank. I ran out, ignoring the rain, and found a half-submerged skiff drifting, caught on the reeds. Inside was a man, his body rotted, face twisted in terror. His arms were contorted at odd angles, and what was left of his torso was riddled with bite marks. My stomach lurched. Ranger growled. I wanted to call the sheriff, but I knew better. Still, a body was a body. Storm or not, I dragged the skiff onto higher ground. By the time I looked closer, the man's jaw had nearly come off. I vomited into the reeds, the stench overwhelming. I'd worked on oil rigs and seen gruesome accidents, but nothing like this. When the sun rose, I finally screwed up the courage to push the skiff back into the water and guide it downriver. Someone had to see this. But when I reached the nearest muddy boat ramp, there was no one around, not even a fisherman. My mind told me to haul it to Sheriff Henshaw's office, but that felt like signing my own death warrant. So, I left the boat and the body there, then drove into town to find Jonah Marks. If anyone would know what to do, it might be him. I stopped by the little shack Jonah used as a home, tucked behind a boarded-up gas station. It was empty. Inside, I found a lantern still lit, a pot of stew still warm. Jonah was gone. That was when I noticed his rowboat was missing from the post he always tied it to. Later that day, the boat turned up belly up in the swamp. Jonah was nowhere to be found. The same day, I tried once more to talk to Sheriff Henshaw. When I told him about the body, he stared at me long and hard. Finally, he said, "We found it. Went missing from over in Stuttgart. Best I can tell. Could be gators got to it. We'll take it from here." And that was that. He stared me down with a hint of menace, like he wanted to be sure I understood I should back off. "You'd do well, Carter, to stay quiet," he added. I drove home in a daze. Maybe it was the Wilkes brothers who killed that man, or maybe it was a gator. But something told me it wasn't that simple. My mind kept returning to the deer hanging in the tree, the footprints, the voice calling my name at night. A few nights later, everything escalated. I was woken by a splash outside. I opened the door, rifle in hand, to see a young woman stumbling out of the water. Her hair was plastered to her face, clothes tattered. She collapsed on my porch. I rushed over. "Hey, hey," I said, kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt?" Her eyes opened. They were bloodshot and distant, as though she were in a trance. "Sophia," she mumbled. "My name, Sophia Harris." I recognized the name. I'd seen missing person posters in town. She was an environmental activist who disappeared months ago while investigating reports of pollution in Bayou Meto. "My God, you're alive," I breathed. I brought her inside, wrapped her in a blanket, boiled some water. She shivered violently, eyes rolling back, and murmured nonsense words that sounded like some foreign language. When she finally focused on me, she said, "She's inside me. Oh God, she's inside." The hair on my arms stood up. "Who?" I asked. She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Griselda, Mother Griselda. She drowned me. No, she left me. To bring her more." Her head jerked back. She let out a guttural moan, then fainted. Ranger stood by the door, trembling, tail between his legs. I tried to figure out what to do. This was way beyond my skill set, but I couldn't leave her in that state. I decided to wait until morning, then see if the clinic in town could help. I dozed off in the chair, rifle across my lap. The next thing I knew, it was just before dawn, and I heard movement behind me. I sprang up, heart pounding. Sophia stood in the center of the room, soaking wet again, but the blanket was dry on the chair. Her hair hung in dripping ropes, as if she'd just come from the water. "You shouldn't have let me in," she whispered. Then her eyes turned completely black. I lunged for my rifle, but she was on me before I could shoulder it. She grabbed my arm, twisted it behind my back. The strength in her wiry frame was impossible, like she weighed nothing and everything at the same time. She pinned me to the floor. My face pressed into the rough wooden planks, fear surging through me. And then, as quickly as it began, she let go. She stumbled back, and her eyes flickered, returning to a dull hazel. She looked down at her hands, horrified. "Help me," she whispered. I didn't have time to respond. She collapsed again, unconscious. Daylight came, and I decided I couldn't wait. I laid Sophia in the canoe, covered her with a tarp, and started paddling to a place where I could get her to town. The trip was tense. Cypress knees jutted from the water like jagged teeth, and every ripple made me jump. About a mile downstream, near a cluster of swamp oaks, I saw a battered old fishing boat. I recognized it. It was Jonah's, tied to a low branch, drifting aimlessly. My breath caught in my chest. "Jonah!" I called. No response. I pulled the canoe alongside and peered into Jonah's boat. He wasn't there, but what I did see made me recoil. The inside was spattered with blood, thick and dried. There were scratch marks on the side, as if he'd fought something tooth and nail. My gut churned. I wanted to search for him, but Sophia's condition pushed me forward. I had to get help. Not long afterward, I reached a muddy bank that led to an old dirt road I knew would connect to the highway. I carried Sophia onto solid ground, locked my canoe to a cypress trunk with a chain, and started trekking toward my truck a half-mile away. That's when I heard a truck engine and spotted two figures standing around my pickup. The Wilkes brothers. My heart sank. They noticed me, and Caleb whistled. "Well, look who's wandered back to the wrong place," he called. "I don't want trouble," I said, keeping my hands visible. "I just need to get this woman to a hospital." Seth peered over my shoulder. "She don't look so good, does she?" he sneered. "Should have left her where you found her." They blocked my way. I saw shotguns in their truck's rack. My mind raced, trying to figure a way out. "Listen," I said, "this isn't about you or your business. If she dies, that's a problem for everyone." Caleb glanced at Seth, and they seemed to share some silent communication. A coldness settled in their eyes. "We don't need no do-gooders or cops out here poking around," Caleb said. "If she goes into town, the sheriff or them feds might take a closer look at our operations. That's bad for business." I realized they were deciding whether to kill us right there. My pulse thundered in my ears. I moved Sophia gently behind me. Her eyes fluttered open. "Don't let her out," she mumbled, delirious. Suddenly, the air shifted, as though the swamp itself drew a breath. A voice, not Sophia's but a rasping, ancient voice, came from her throat. "The swamp chooses who it devours. Will you join me, children?" Caleb and Seth froze, guns half raised. Before anyone could react, Sophia lunged at Seth, slender arms locking around his neck. I swear her feet weren't even touching the ground. She lifted him clean off it, shrieking like a banshee. Seth's eyes went wide with terror as her hands tightened. I should have been horrified, but my body was paralyzed. "Stop!" Caleb bellowed, but he couldn't get a clear shot. Blood spurted from Seth's mouth. His shotgun clattered to the ground. With a sickening crack, Sophia snapped his neck. She dropped him like a rag doll. Caleb screamed and fired his shotgun wildly. I ducked, dragging Sophia down. The shot flew over our heads, shredding foliage. In her eyes, I saw that unearthly blackness again, but she seemed stunned. as if the act had taken a toll. She slumped in my arms. Caleb, face contorted in rage, pumped the shotgun, ready to fire again. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the fallen weapon near Seth's body and aimed. We locked eyes. For a moment I thought we'd shoot each other, but then he screamed, "Murderers!" and ran, stumbling into the swamp. I let out a shaky breath, heart hammering. I hadn't meant for any of this to happen. Seth Wilkes's body lay twisted on the ground, eyes empty. Sophia was limp, face pale. I had to get out of there. Somehow I managed to load Sophia into my truck and drive toward town. I didn't even know where I'd take her, probably the small clinic. But as we neared the highway, a patrol car sped up behind me, lights flashing. Sheriff Henshaw. My blood turned to ice. I pulled over, carefully placed the shotgun on the floor. Henshaw got out, hand on his sidearm. 2 deputies accompanied him, faces grim. "Well, well, Carter," the sheriff drawled. "We got a call about gunshots. Care to explain why your passenger's covered in blood?" I swallowed. "She's sick. Something's possessed her. She killed Seth Wilkes in self-defense." Henshaw's jaw flexed. "Wilkes is a friend of mine," he said curtly. "We had ourselves a good arrangement. Now I got one man dead, and you with your hands all over the scene. Doesn't look good for you." Sophia moaned, stirring. Henshaw motioned for the deputies to pull her out of the truck. They did so roughly, ignoring her delirious state. One deputy, a thick-set man with a mustache, started patting me down. He found the shotgun. The sheriff shook his head. "You've been real busy, Carter. Dead bodies floating in the swamp, missing folk. Now we find you in the middle of a homicide. I think you know more than you're telling." One deputy shoved me, pinning my arms behind my back. "Don't fight," he hissed. I didn't. A feeling of dread knotted my stomach. Maybe they'd take me into custody, or maybe they'd just put a bullet in my head right there to bury this mess. Before Henshaw could say anything else, a blood-curdling scream came from the deputy holding Sophia. She'd come to, eyes black again, and she sank her teeth into his arm. The deputy howled, staggering back. Henshaw drew his sidearm, firing 2 shots wildly. One bullet struck Sophia in the shoulder. She dropped to the ground, shrieking an inhuman wail that echoed through the swamp. The moment she hit the dirt, the air around us felt thick and heavy. Leaves rattled in the trees, though there was no wind. A high-pitched noise buzzed in my ears. She lay there panting, eyes rolling back. Blood oozed from the gunshot wound. "She's inside me," Sophia gurgled. The sheriff, breathing hard, glanced from me to Sophia. He signaled his deputies to move in. "Cuff them both," he snapped, "and keep a gun on the woman." The deputy slapped cuffs on me, ignoring my protests. Another deputy, his forearm still bleeding, wrestled Sophia's arms behind her back and cuffed her too. Henshaw bent down, looking Sophia in the eye. "You're coming with us, you hear? We'll see what the doc says, but I got a mind to finish you here and now." He turned to me. "You, Carter, you're coming too." They loaded us into the patrol car. I watched from the back seat, powerless as they called for backup. One deputy took my truck. Another followed in the sheriff's car. We headed back toward the swamp instead of into town, and a cold dread spread through me. We weren't going to any clinic. We were going to be buried out here. The car lurched down a muddy track that cut deeper into Bayou Mato. As we stopped near a clearing, I saw a group of men waiting. More deputies, plus a few locals who looked rough around the edges, likely on Henshaw's payroll. My mind whirled. This was a cover-up. They were going to get rid of me. Maybe Sophia too. My heart hammered as they dragged us out of the cruiser. Sheriff Henshaw gestured to the group. "We end this right now," he said. "Carter's stirring up trouble. That Wilkes boy is dead. And this woman, she's some kind of lunatic. We end them both here, bury 'em deep, Say gators got him. Panic surged in my chest. My mouth was dry, words caught in my throat. Sophia coughed wetly, blood staining her shirt. She looked at me, almost lucid for a moment. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then the night air erupted in shrill laughter. It came from all around us, as if the swamp itself was cackling. The men hesitated, guns wavering. The laughter rose to a spine-tingling pitch. Then shapes emerged from behind cypress trunks. I recognized Caleb Wilkes among them, face pale, clothes soaking wet. His eyes looked vacant and he moved with jerky, unnatural motions. Beside him stood more figures, faces I didn't recognize, presumably more of the swamp's lost souls. Some had open wounds, others were half decayed. All of them advanced, silent except for that eerie laughter echoing in the air. "Wah! What the hell?" a deputy shouted, stepping back, fumbling to reload. Caleb opened his mouth, but the voice that came out wasn't his. It was the same rasp I'd heard from Sophia. "You do not belong here," it hissed. The men fired. Bullets tore through the shapes. Some fell, others kept moving. Chaos reigned. I threw myself to the ground, cuffed hands behind me. Mud soaked my clothes. A bullet whizzed by my ear. Henshaw was shouting orders, but it was all lost in the cacophony of screams and gunfire. Then I felt hands on me, pulling me upright. A deputy attempted to drag me away, but I saw a flash of movement. Sophia, lunging forward, her cuffs somehow undone. She slammed into him. A knife appeared in her hands and she stabbed him in the throat. He gargled, dropping me. I fell hard, vision spinning. I scrambled in the mud, searching for keys or a weapon. Gunshots continued. One by one, the men in Henshaw's group were either fleeing or getting torn apart by those possessed figures. The stench of blood and swamp water filled the air. Ranger. My dog. I thought of him alone at the cabin. I had to get out of here, get back, and get the hell away. My fumbling fingers finally found a set of keys on the dead deputy's belt. My wrists were slick with mud and sweat, but I managed to unlock the cuffs. Then I found a revolver near one of the fallen men. I got to my feet, scanning the clearing. Smoke from gunfire drifted in the moonlight. Sheriff Henshaw was backed against a cypress tree, face pale, reloading his pistol. He spotted me. Hatred flared in his eyes. "You!" he snarled. He fired twice, the bullets going wide. I ducked behind a trunk. Another shot. Splinters of wood flew. Before he could fire again, something crashed into him from behind. A shambling figure I recognized as Jonah Marks. The old trapper's eyes were milk white, a deep wound in his neck. He pinned Henshaw, letting out a guttural moan. Henshaw screamed, and the sound cut short. I turned away, my stomach twisting. I ran, or tried to. The swamp seemed alive, pulling at my feet. The ground was slick, roots curling around my ankles. I stumbled through the brush, adrenaline driving me forward. At some point, the gunfire stopped. All I heard was ragged breathing, my own, and the faint echoes of dying men. I have no idea how long I wandered. When I reached my cabin, Ranger was whining at the door. Relief flooded me. "Good boy," I whispered, letting him smell my hand, but he backed away, growling. I realized I was caked in blood and swamp scum. Maybe I smelled like death. I forced a shaky laugh. "It's me," I said. "It's Eli." He crouched, hackles raised. Something was wrong. His eyes looked different. He let out a low snarl. My heart clenched. "Ranger." I took a step forward. He lunged, teeth bared, and sank them into my leg. Pain shot through me. I yelled, tried to pry him off. His eyes were wild, almost like the blackness I'd seen in Sophia's. "No! No!" I gasped. I had the revolver in my hand. I didn't want to do it, but he was locked on, tearing flesh. My leg buckled. Tears blurred my vision as I pressed the muzzle to his head and fired. He collapsed instantly. I fell back against the cabin steps, blood pouring from the wound. Everything spun. I screamed until my throat burned. Ranger, my only companion, was gone. I wrapped my leg in a makeshift bandage. I wanted to bury my dog properly, but I was too dizzy, too weak. Blood loss made me sluggish. I must have passed out. When I woke, it was morning. I limped to my truck, fueled by a single thought: get away. I drove like a madman toward town. My leg throbbed and I almost fainted twice, but I made it. I pulled up to the clinic, half hoping for any help. Instead, the moment I stumbled out, a wave of law enforcement vehicles surrounded me. County police, unmarked cars, men in suits, the FBI by the look of them. I collapsed to my knees, exhausted and delirious. "Hands in the air," someone shouted. I raised my shaking arms. They dragged me into an ambulance. My consciousness flickered in and out. I recall bits and pieces. Agents talking in low voices, referencing bodies, drug operations, missing persons. They asked me questions about the Wilkes brothers, about Sheriff Henshaw. I was in no state to answer. After the hospital stabilized me, the interrogation started. They accused me of multiple murders: Jonah Marks, Seth Wilkes, a deputy, even my dog. They said the swamp had been declared a contamination zone. Some nonsense about toxic algae blooms. That's why the FBI was there, they claimed. The more I tried to explain about Mother Griselda or possession, the more the agents exchanged glances, writing me off as a lunatic. They concluded I went on a rampage, presumably in a drug-fueled state. No mention was made of Sheriff Henshaw or his men. No mention of Sophia. No mention of anything that actually happened. They locked me in a county jail cell. Days passed in a blur of questions and sedation. None of my answers satisfied them. Eventually, a suited agent with a stoic face came to my cell. He said, "Mr. Carter, we have reason to believe your story is incomplete. We're going to take you to a federal facility for further evaluation. This is bigger than you think." I stared at him, numb. A federal facility. Was that code for indefinite detention? Part of me wondered if I should be relieved or terrified. At least I'd be out of that cell. I had no fight left. On my last night in that dingy cell, I couldn't sleep. My leg throbbed and the memory of Ranger haunted me. The flickering overhead light hummed softly. Then, in the silence, I heard it again. Her voice. A dry whisper drifting through the vent near the ceiling. Eli. It cooed, drawing out my name. I scrambled up on the bunk, pressing my ear to the vent. "Who's there?" I hissed, heart racing. Silence. Then the voice whispered, "You shouldn't have let me in." My blood ran cold. My breath caught in my throat. The vent rattled as if something was crawling through it. And for just a second I caught a glimpse of a pale, wrinkled face, the eyes black as tar, smiling at me from behind the grate. A face I somehow knew was Mother Griselda herself. Then it was gone, leaving only the faint echo of laughter in the air. I climbed down, shaking. I wished I could say it was a dream, but my ears still rang with that laughter. I realized with a sense of finality that it doesn't matter where they take me. Wherever I go, the swamp, and what lurks within it, will follow. Because once you've let her in, she never truly leaves. That's my story. No one believes me, of course, and I don't blame them. But every night, even in a locked cell, I hear her, the old, vengeful spirit that haunts Bayou Meto. She's always whispering my name, reminding me that the swamp never forgets. And it never lets go. Story 5. My name is Matt Grayson. I'm 34 years old. This happened in October 2022 when I decided to live off-grid in the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas. I'd spent most of my life in Little Rock, working long shifts as an EMT. The things I saw over the years: Violent accidents, random cruelty, families torn apart, left me with a gnawing need for isolation. After my divorce, I needed a clean break. No more city noise, no more heartbreak. Just me and my dog, Cooper, out in the wilderness. I didn't realize, at the time, that some horrors are far worse than anything you see in a busy emergency room. I arrived at the Ouachita National Forest in the first week of October. The air was still warm during the day, cool at night. My cabin was little more than a sturdy shack I'd built over several weekends that summer. It sat on a small clearing about 3 miles from the nearest logging road. Solar panels on the roof. A hand-dug latrine behind a stand of pine trees. Rain barrels collecting water. I'd brought a rifle, a decent supply of ammo, and enough gear to hunt or fish for most of my meals. The plan was to test myself for a month, maybe 2, and see if off-grid life was really what I wanted. Cooper was my only companion. He's a Belgian Malinois, about 5 years old, and I trained him in basic search and rescue techniques back when I still worked as an EMT. He was agile, smart, protective. Deep down, I think he sensed my anxious heart. He never strayed too far from my side. From day one, I felt that strange hush in the forest. No passing cars, no hum of electricity, just wind through the pines and the occasional scramble of small critters. But there was something else too, a feeling like I was being watched. Cooper seemed on edge. He sniffed around the perimeter of our clearing, hackles up as if expecting trouble. The first real sign that something was off came on my second night. I was drifting off to sleep when Cooper started growling. A low, throaty rumble. I reached for my flashlight and swept the beam around the cabin. Nothing. No raccoons, no squirrels, no sign of anything. But Cooper remained fixed on the wall, as if he could see through it. I said his name quietly, and he turned to me with a look that almost seemed to say, "Be ready." I tried to brush it off as my own nerves. We were in a wild environment after all. Strange noises are part of the package. But the next morning, I found footprints outside the cabin. They were elongated, like a human foot, but with thick claws at the tips. I considered the possibility of a large cat or a black bear with a deformed paw. I'd seen stranger things. Still, it set me on edge. On the 4th day, I got a chilling reminder that I wasn't the only one out here. I was out gathering kindling when I caught the stench of decay. Cooper whined and darted ahead, nose to the ground. Pushing through thick brambles, I stumbled upon a deer carcass. The poor thing was ripped apart, its ribs exposed, entrails scattered. At first glance, I suspected a bear kill or even a wild hog, but the wounds were strangely precise, like something with hands had methodically peeled away the hide and flesh. Cooper tucked his tail. I got this thick, suffocating dread in my gut. I heard a rustling behind me and spun, raising my rifle. A man stood there, about my age, maybe a few years older, wearing camo pants and a worn-out jacket. He had dark hair pulled into a greasy ponytail. He lifted his hands, showing he wasn't armed, at least not visibly. "Easy," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you." I lowered the gun but kept my guard up. "Who are you?" "Name's Alan Strickland. I'm just out here hunting." He glanced at the carcass and frowned. "If you like the video, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. See you on the next videos." Looks like somebody's beat me to it. Hunting, I thought, or maybe something else. The deer had been ripped apart hours ago, maybe less. Alan smelled faintly of stale tobacco. He had this charisma about him, a slight smile that never touched his eyes. "You staying out here too?" he asked. Yeah, I said. "Built a small place near the creek." He nodded slowly. "Bad idea to be alone. People go missing around these parts. Locals usually won't come this deep." I wanted to ask more, but the tension felt too thick. I shifted from one foot to the other. "I'm fine," I said. "I know how to take care of myself." His gaze flicked to Cooper. "Nice dog," he said. "Just be careful. If you see anything strange, do yourself a favor. Pretend you didn't." He turned and walked off before I could question him further. Something about the conversation felt like a threat, or maybe a warning. The next few days passed uneventfully. I tried to lose myself in the routines of off-grid living, collecting firewood, setting snares, fishing in the creek. But each night, Cooper's hackles rose. I started hearing noises, faint whispers, footsteps that stopped whenever I held my breath to listen. A couple of times, I thought I heard my own voice calling to Cooper from somewhere in the woods. Around the 7th day, I planned to do a thorough patrol around the area. I wanted to figure out who, or what, was skulking around my camp at night. The morning was crisp. The sun barely filtered through tall pines when I loaded my rifle and set out. Cooper trotted ahead of me, nose to the ground. We circled north, where the deer carcass had been, and deeper into a part of the forest I hadn't explored. The terrain became steeper. Moss-covered rocks jutted out of the ground like broken teeth. After about an hour, Cooper let out a sharp bark. I ran to him, pushing through thick brush, and nearly fell into an abandoned campsite. The tent was flattened, ripped in places, covered in leaf litter. Moth scattered as I nudged the fabric with my boot. Inside, I found a rotting sleeping bag, a single boot, a backpack with zippers torn open. My gut clenched when I spotted a dark stain near the entrance. It looked an awful lot like blood. I rummaged through the backpack, hoping for ID. Instead, I found a small spiral notebook with blood-smeared pages. I flipped through the scrawled entries. Heard voices again last night. Sounded like my wife calling me, but she's dead. I know it can't be her. Something is outside my tent, scratching. I found huge footprints, like a man's foot, but elongated. Claws. God help me, it's still out there. My hands shook as I read. Cooper sniffed at the corner of the tent. I followed his gaze and saw shallow graves, mounds of disturbed earth. I swallowed hard and moved to check one, even though every instinct screamed at me not to. Pushing aside some loose soil, I unearthed part of a human jawbone. The flesh was gone, the bone yellowed. I covered it back up quickly, fighting down bile. "Jesus," I whispered. My heart hammered in my chest. I'd seen body parts before, obviously, but not like this. Not so deliberately placed. I heard a noise behind me, branches snapping. I raised the rifle. Alan Strickland emerged again, that same wary expression on his face. "I told you people go missing," he said quietly. "You find what's left of them?" I didn't respond. My mind raced as I tried to piece together if Alan was involved in this or just another lost soul who'd stumbled onto something nightmarish. He stepped closer. "You should leave," he said. "I used to do business out here. People smuggling, drug runs, you name it. But we started finding things. Bodies torn up, tracks that weren't human. You see that big footprint yet?" I nodded stiffly. Alan eyed me. "I'm not proud of my past, but there's something worse than men out here. Something hunts us. And if you think your dog's gonna protect you, you're dead wrong." I bristled, but I also felt a chill creep along my arms. He looked tired, almost desperate. "You come out here alone for what?" he asked. "Peace," I said, "but it hasn't exactly been peaceful." His lips twisted into a half sneer, half smile. "Then get out while you still can." He glanced around the campsite. "And, mind if I grab anything useful?" I shrugged, uneasy. "Help yourself." He bent down and started rifling through pockets, items. That was my cue to leave. The last thing I wanted was to share space with an ex-con who'd admitted to human trafficking. I whistled for Cooper and we hurried back, my head spinning. That night, I couldn't shake the sense that Alan was out there, circling my camp. Or maybe it was something else. My rifle stayed within arm's reach. Around midnight, Cooper started barking like crazy. I jumped up, adrenaline buzzing. Swinging open the cabin door, I shone a flashlight around the clearing. Standing at the tree line was Cooper. Except Cooper was right beside me, barking. For an instant, my mind refused to process it. Then I realized the figure was shaped like a dog, but its eyes, they reflected the light in a way that wasn't quite right, almost like a human's reflection. It darted away into the darkness. I whipped around to check on the real Cooper. He was trembling, teeth bared. Every survival instinct inside me was screaming. We locked ourselves in the cabin and listened to random tapping on the walls until dawn. Each time I mustered the courage to check, I'd see only shadows. The next morning, I decided I couldn't just wait around. Whatever was out there wanted me off balance. I had to be proactive. I secured my supplies, food, first aid kit, ammo, and decided to do a larger patrol. If I could figure out where this thing was nesting, maybe I could scare it off or kill it. I left Cooper at the cabin with enough water just to be safe. I didn't want him running after any illusions. I hiked north again, rifle at the ready. After a few hours, I spotted footprints in the mud, large and clawed like I'd seen before, but there was also a partial boot print, human. It looked fresh. I followed them to a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow valley. The sight below made my blood run cold. Tucked away among the trees was a makeshift campsite. A couple of old tents, tarps, and an extensive array of black trash bags piled on top of each other. I crept closer, trying to stay silent. The first bag I opened had fertilizer and various chemicals, evidence of a hidden grow operation maybe. The second had something that smelled rancid. I peeled it open enough to glimpse rotting flesh and snapped it shut immediately. Human remains. Possibly multiple people. I heard a crunch behind me, and I spun around. Alan Strickland stood there, a strange, wild look in his eyes. He was armed with a hunting knife strapped to his belt, and his right hand twitched near the handle. "You shouldn't have come here," he muttered. My pulse thundered in my ears. "What is all this?" I demanded. He spat on the ground. "Old trafficking drop point. I'm not involved anymore, but certain people still use it. You know how it goes. Rural county, no real oversight. Sheriff's on the payroll. Leaves us alone, as long as things don't get too messy." I glared at him. "Messy? There are bodies in those bags." Alan's eyes flickered. "That's not my work. That's something else's. We used to lose people all the time. Drug runners, some of the smugglers. They'd vanish at night. We'd find bones, bits of them in the morning. It's got a taste for blood, man. And you're in its hunting ground." I realized the entire operation was overshadowed by this unnatural threat in the woods. A predator that not even hardened criminals wanted to tangle with. I gripped my rifle. "If you're not with them anymore, why are you still out here?" He took a step closer. "I'm trying to find a stash I hid. Money. Enough to disappear for good. But you're messing around in things you don't understand. Why didn't you just mind your business?" Before I could respond, Alan lunged for me. His fist caught me on the jaw, and I stumbled back, nearly losing my grip on the rifle. I managed to bring the butt of it up, catching him in the ribs. He grunted, but he was quick. He wrestled the gun to the side and swung again. I dodged, my adrenaline spiking. I wasn't used to direct combat like this. On the ambulance, I'd seen violent patients, but we always had backup or sedation. Alan tried to yank the rifle free. I pulled the trigger in desperation. The shot went wide, echoing through the valley. He snarled in anger. My mind flashed with the possibility that the noise might attract that thing. Panicking, I shoved him backward. Alan tripped over a root and I pulled the gun back toward me. Cooper wasn't here to help. I was on my own. Alan scrambled to his feet, eyes blazing. You brought the law on us, didn't you? Or you're going to." He glanced toward the black trash bags. "Can't let that happen." He reached for his knife. My heart pounded as I leveled the rifle at his chest. "Don't," I yelled. We stood there, panting, staring each other down. Then, abruptly, Alan's eyes flicked behind me. He let out a choked gasp. His face twisted in terror. "Oh, God," he breathed. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Standing at the edge of the clearing was the silhouette of a creature. It had the shape of a man, but elongated limbs, the same impossibly large footprints I'd tracked. And the face. It was wrong. I couldn't quite see it in the shadows, but it reflected the sunlight in a twisted, uncanny way. It let out a guttural hiss. Alan bolted. He ran so fast he nearly tripped, crashed through the tree line, and was gone. The creature didn't chase him. Instead, it stepped into the clearing, inching closer to me. My hands shook, but I kept the rifle aimed. My breathing was ragged. The thing studied me, tilting its head at an unnatural angle. That's when I realized I was hearing something that shouldn't have been possible. My own voice coming from it, softly repeating random words I'd spoken earlier, like it was practicing. Then it lunged. I fired. The shot clipped the creature's shoulder, and it shrieked, an ear-splitting sound that made my hair stand on end. It vanished into the brush with terrifying speed, leaving behind only a smear of dark fluid on the ground. My ears rang, my mind struggling to cope with what I'd just seen. I couldn't stay. I ran back to the cabin as fast as I could, expecting at any moment for the creature to tackle me from behind. But I managed to stumble through the door, slam it shut, and brace it with furniture. Cooper barked anxiously, pacing around me as if he could smell the fear radiating off my skin. Near dusk, a pickup truck rumbled up the logging road. It was the county sheriff, Ed Hollis. Gruff man, thick mustache, mid-50s. I was so relieved to see a normal human being that I practically threw open the door. But Sheriff Hollis didn't seem at all surprised by my panic or my story. He just listened with that glassy stare. When I told him about the creature, about the abandoned campsite, the bodies, he just shrugged. "People go missing out here all the time," he said. He looked down, noticing some dark stains on my boots, probably the fluid from the creature I'd shot. I realized with a jolt that his boots had a similar stain, almost dried, and it struck me. Maybe he'd been out there too, dealing with the same monstrosity, or letting it do his dirty work. "What exactly do you want me to do?" Hollis asked. "Call the feds? They'll come in and shut down half the county. Folks around here don't need that." I stared at him, disbelief twisting my stomach. "But there are bodies," I insisted. "People have died." He curled his lip. "I'll make a note of it. Put up a missing person sign if we find a name. But I suggest you head back to the city. This place isn't for you." Anger flared in me. "So you're just going to let this continue?" The sheriff tapped the butt of his sidearm. "Sometimes the easiest way to protect a community is to let certain problems stay contained. Ain't no reason to cause a panic." He paused, then gave me a long, meaningful look. "If I were you, I'd pack up. Now, before you get in over your head." Then he turned, walked back to his truck, and drove off. He'd barely been there 5 minutes, and I understood in that moment that there would be no help coming, at least not from the local law. If anything, he'd stand in my way. The night was torturous. Every noise outside felt like an attack. Cooper barked until he was hoarse. I was convinced that Alan might try to come back, or the creature might find a way in. The hours dragged on. Finally, near dawn, I dozed off in my chair, the rifle on my lap. I jolted awake to the sound of Cooper whining. The door was ajar. My heart hammered. I must have been so exhausted I didn't hear it open. I raced outside, calling Cooper's name. Silence. The sky was gray with early morning light. My stomach twisted. Frantically, I followed paw prints around the cabin. They led into the woods, along with footprints that were half human, half something else. I was terrified, but I couldn't abandon Cooper. I ran after them, ignoring the stabs of pain in my legs and chest as brambles cut at me. After a mile or so, I heard barking. Cooper! My relief was short-lived, though, because the bark sounded off, like it had been slowed down and distorted. Another bark came from a different direction entirely. Then the two barks overlapped, echoing through the trees. My mind reeled. I pushed on, stumbling over roots and fallen branches. Finally, I broke into a small clearing. Lying against a tree trunk was Alan Strickland's body, impaled on a jagged branch, chest torn open. His face was gone. I gagged, staggering back. It was as if something had peeled the skin from his skull and left it to the elements. I shook all over. This was the second human corpse I'd found in the past week. Then I heard Cooper whimper. I whirled around. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, holding Cooper's limp body in its arms. My sweet dog, still breathing but unconscious. The figure's face looked half like a man's, half like a distorted mask of gristle and fur. Its mouth parted, revealing stained teeth. Its eyes locked onto mine. Rage overwhelmed my fear. I raised my rifle and fired, but the figure blurred away at impossible speed, carrying Cooper with it. I fired again into the trees, the shots echoing. Nothing. Silence, except for the pounding of my heart. Cooper was gone. For a moment, I just stood there, trembling, tears burning my eyes. Then I forced myself to move, to search the area. I found only a trail of dark droplets leading deeper into the forest. My dog was bleeding. Or something was. Without thinking, I followed. The trail led me to a cave opening hidden behind a massive boulder. It was more a hole in the hillside than a proper cave. The stench of decay wafted out. I heard a soft whimper from inside. I swallowed my terror and crawled in, rifle first. The darkness was absolute. I clicked on my flashlight. The floor was littered with bones, animal and human, all jumbled together. My mind wanted to shut down. Then I saw Cooper, lying near a wall of wet stone, whimpering. I scrambled to his side, heart in my throat. He was alive, battered and bleeding, but he flinched away from me as if he didn't recognize me. Matt! A voice echoed in the darkness. My own voice. I spun, shining the flashlight wildly. Then I saw it. The creature perched on a ledge, eyes reflecting the beam in a sickly yellow. It let out a raspy chuckle that sounded like me. It was mimicking my voice again. I steadied the rifle. My hands shook so badly I almost couldn't aim. The creature snarled, revealing sharp teeth, and lunged. I fired, hitting it in the torso. It screeched, thrashing against the stone walls. Bits of rock rained down. Dust filled the air. I fired again, but it darted sideways and vanished into a narrow tunnel at the back of the cave. Its ragged breathing faded into the depths. I collapsed beside Cooper, checking his wounds. Deep gashes along his flank, possible internal injuries. "Hang on, buddy," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. I was an EMT. I could treat him, but not here. Not without proper supplies. Carefully, I lifted him, ignoring his pained yelp. I carried him out of that hellish cave. We made it back to the cabin by midday. My muscles burned, and Cooper was going into shock. I gave him water, bandaged the worst wounds as best I could. He was barely conscious, but at least he was alive. I stroked his fur, whispered soothing words. I felt a surge of hope. If I could get him stable, maybe I could hike out to my truck and find a vet. We'd have to leave everything behind, but that didn't matter anymore. That's when I heard a truck engine. Sheriff Hollis again. He parked and got out, hands on his hips. "Heard more gunshots," he drawled. "You out here causing trouble, boy?" "I need help," I said, stepping onto the porch. Something took Cooper. I found a cave full of bodies. Alan's dead, impaled on a tree. Just call the FBI or state police, something. Hollis tipped back his hat, looking me up and down. He saw the blood caked on my arms and clothes. Sounds like a mess. Best if we keep it quiet. We don't want the feds crawling around, shutting down the county. People rely on these woods. There is a monster in these woods, I hissed, anger and desperation roaring in my chest. And you're worried about your county's reputation? You're a damned coward. He moved faster than I expected, drawing his sidearm and leveling it at me. My heart pounded. Watch your mouth, he said softly. I have a responsibility here. The folks with real money in this area don't like their business disturbed. You stumbled into it, and now you're bringing the devil down on us. Not everyone can be saved. I realized with dawning horror that he was willing to shoot me if it meant preserving the status quo. But then Cooper let out a weak bark from inside. Hollis jerked his head in that direction. Your dog's hurt pretty bad, eh? He considered. You can take him and leave. If you make it out alive, you keep your mouth shut. Understand? Fury coursed through me, but I had no leverage. Hollis was the law out here. Or at least, he had the power to decide who lived or died. Fine, I muttered. Good. He holstered his weapon. Get your dog. Get out. Don't come back. He turned to leave, but then, from behind me, I heard a low growl. Cooper stood in the doorway, unsteady but baring his teeth. The growl changed in pitch, deepening into something almost human. My blood went cold. I could see Cooper's eyes. They were wrong, clouded, as if someone else was looking out from inside him. Cooper, I stepped forward. It's me. He twitched, jerked his head like he was fighting something inside him. Then his lips curled, revealing his gums. A voice rasped from his throat, in a distorted version of Alan Strickland's tone. You should have left. Sheriff Hollis went pale. What the hell? Cooper lunged at him, faster than I'd ever seen. He clamped onto the sheriff's neck with impossible strength, jaws snapping bone and flesh. Hollis screamed, firing his sidearm wildly. The shots tore through Cooper's body, but he didn't let go until the sheriff crumpled to the ground, blood pumping from his severed jugular. The air filled with gunpowder and coppery tang. I stood frozen, heart in my throat. Cooper, my dog, turned to face me, panting, muzzle dripping red. His eyes glowed with that unnatural emptiness. You should have left, he growled again in that same haunting mimic. Tears streamed down my face. My best friend was possessed by that thing. Had it happened in the cave? Was that why Cooper was alive in the first place? My stomach churned and my legs nearly gave out. But I raised my rifle. My mind screamed in protest. How could I kill my own dog? Cooper snarled and sprang at me. I squeezed the trigger. The bullet hit him square in the chest, stopping him mid-leap. He yelped, collapsing onto the porch, his body convulsed, eyes rolling back. For a moment, I thought I saw his old self returning, the confusion in his gaze, the apology. Then his body flickered, like an image losing focus. For an instant, I saw a twisted, human-like face beneath his skin, mouth parted in a silent scream. And just like that, Cooper was gone. I dropped to my knees, sobbing. The love of my life, the only companion I trusted, was dead. And I had pulled the trigger. I heard the sheriff's ragged breathing as he clung to life, but it faded within seconds. Silence draped over the clearing like a funeral veil. Sunset came and went, and I sat there in shock. My cabin, my off-grid dream, covered in blood and the bodies of my dog and a corrupt sheriff. Eventually, a sliver of survival instinct kicked in. I needed to get out. If the local authorities discovered this scene, they'd assume I'd killed Hollis, Or maybe they'd cover it up in some other twisted way. Either way, my life here was finished. I packed a small bag, food, water, whatever ammo remained. My hands shook so hard I could barely function. I forced myself to do the practical tasks, ignoring the raging storm of grief. Then, as an act of final respect, I carried Cooper's body into the woods and buried him near the creek where we'd fished together. I placed a small stone marker. My tears never stopped. With that done, I stumbled toward the nearest trail that would lead me back to my truck. The forest was dark, full of shifting shadows and rustling branches. Every sound made me flinch. I half expected the shape of that creature, some twisted figure with Cooper's face, to leap out at me, but nothing did. After hours of trudging, I found the logging road. My truck was still parked where I'd left it. I fired up the engine, numb from exhaustion and trauma. As I drove, I passed a pair of deputy squad cars with lights flashing, heading deeper into the forest. Perhaps they were responding to the gunshots. If they tried to track me down, maybe they'd find only more carnage. I reached the highway around dawn. The weight of what I'd seen, what I'd done, crushed me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cooper's final moments, or Alan's flayed face, or that monstrous silhouette in the cave. I drove until I couldn't stay awake, pulling into a deserted rest stop, shaking and delirious. I wish that was the end. But the nightmares followed me every night. In some of them, I'm still in that cave, the bones clacking around me as the creature's voice, my voice, whispers in the dark. In others, Cooper comes back to me, but his eyes are vacant, and he tries to speak with a dead man's voice. I tried to report it once, to the state police. They took my statement politely, but I could see it in their eyes. The disbelief, the pity. No official investigation ever came of it, at least none that I know about. Maybe Sheriff Hollis's replacements decided to keep the same code of silence he had. Maybe they found the bodies and sealed it all away under some hush-hush classification. I'll never know. I've spent months trying to rebuild my life, away from the forest and its dark secrets. But every so often, late at night, I hear a distant bark that sounds like Cooper, and I remember how a shape with 2 long limbs and empty eyes once stood outside my cabin, mimicking the only friend I had left in the world. All I can do now is warn people. Don't go to the Ouachita National Forest alone. If you do, don't stay after dark. And if you hear your own voice, or a loved one's voice, calling from the woods, run. Run and never look back. Because there's something there that shouldn't exist. Something that takes what we love and uses it against us. Something that knows how to wear our skin, our voices, our very souls. And if you see a dog with a too human stare, standing at the edge of your camp for God's sake, don't let it inside. Story 6. My name is Hannah Moore, and I'm 28 years old. This happened in August of 2023 at a place called Iron Fork Lake in Arkansas. To this day, I'm still not entirely sure how I got away or why I was allowed to leave, but I remember every detail. I wish I could forget. I went there with my boyfriend, David Caldwell, and my best friend, Tara Mitchell, for a weekend trip. David was obsessed with exploring abandoned locations for his YouTube channel. He called it Paranormal Urban Exploring, though we never once captured anything remotely supernatural before. I considered it more of a quirky hobby than a serious pursuit, but David had been pushing hard to build an audience. He said Iron Fork Lake was special. Dozens of rumors, unsolved disappearances, a half-submerged cabin no one dared approach. Tara, who was 25, wasn't a fan of David's. She thought he was too reckless and egotistical, but she went along because she and I had been friends forever. She was a veterinarian, kind-hearted, patient. She said she'd tag along just to make sure I was safe. When we arrived at the lake, I realized we weren't the only ones around. We met a man named Jonah Ruiz. He was 32, built like a linebacker, with a military posture and a shotgun slung over his shoulder. At first, I thought maybe he was law enforcement or a ranger, but he explained he was a local fisherman who used to serve in the army. He lived not far from the lake in a small cabin of his own. He'd come out to check the water and said we'd picked a strange time to camp. He claimed the fish had been dying off in droves. There was something about Jonah, maybe the faint tremor in his voice or the wary way he looked at the dark water, that worried me. He warned us. Iron Fork Lake had a reputation, and that old half-submerged cabin was even worse. According to Jonah, people who go there don't come back. David just laughed. He had that cocky grin that drove me crazy sometimes. "Mind if I hang around?" Jonah asked. "I don't think you realize how dangerous this place can be." David shrugged, rolling his eyes slightly, but I nodded. Tara hesitated, glancing uneasily at David. "I'd feel better if you did," I admitted. "You know the area better than we do." So Jonah decided to stick around, at least for the night. We set up camp along the shore, maybe a few hundred yards away from where the cabin's tilted roof jutted out of the water. The smell near the lake was rancid, and as we walked by, I saw bloated fish floating belly up. The forest was silent, no birds, no insects humming. It felt like everything with wings or legs had fled. "Maybe there's a chemical spill," Tara said, wrinkling her nose. "This can't be natural." David waved it off. "Whatever's going on, it's perfect for a creepy atmosphere. Our audience is going to love this." But as the sun set, even David got a little quieter. There was something oppressive in the twilight, as though the shadows among the pines grew longer and heavier than they should have. Jonah built a fire and insisted we keep it blazing bright. I noticed he kept his shotgun within arm's reach. We were roasting marshmallows when we got our first taste of real trouble. Two men emerged from the trees. Both carried pistols. One even had a rifle slung across his shoulder. Their clothes were dirty, the look in their eyes colder than the night air. "Evening," the taller man said. "You folks out here sightseeing?" Nobody answered. Jonah stood up slowly, his hand drifting to his shotgun. The men sneered. "Let's not do anything stupid," the shorter one said. "We don't want trouble. But you shouldn't be here." David, of course, had to open his mouth. "Open? It's public land. We can camp wherever we want. Who are you?" The taller man smirked. "We're nobody you want to meet. Word of advice, pack up and go. You see us again, it won't be friendly." Jonah must have sensed how volatile they were. He cleared his throat and said, "We're just camping a couple of nights. We'll mind our own business." Both men studied us for a moment. Then the shorter one stepped forward and pointed at David's camera. "Are you recording?" David shook his head. "Not right now." "I better not see myself on YouTube," the man growled, his hand tightening on his pistol. Then, in an instant, they were gone, swallowed by the darkness of the pines. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Tara's face was pale, her eyes wide. "Meth cooks," Jonah muttered under his breath. "They use these woods to hide labs. We need to keep a low profile." David was mad. "We can't let those creeps drive us off. I'm here to get footage of the cabin. I'm not leaving without it." I stared at him in disbelief. "They're armed, David. They're serious." But David was stubborn. He insisted we'd be fine as long as we didn't snoop around wherever those guys had their operation. Tara looked like she wanted to pack up and go. She only stayed because she didn't want to leave me alone. That night, we slept in tense silence. Jonah set his sleeping bag outside my tent, the shotgun resting next to him. I barely slept, the acrid smell of fish rot and rotting algae filling my nostrils. Something about the water lapping the shore felt off, like it had its own heartbeat. By morning, David's mood had improved, though the rest of us still felt uneasy. He insisted we check out the half-sunken cabin. Jonah and Tara both tried to talk him out of it, but David wouldn't listen, so we ended up hiking around the shoreline with him, searching for a safe spot to access the structure. Most of it was submerged, but the front porch and part of a living room remained above water. We found a rotting wooden dock that led directly to the porch. The place smelled of mildew, fish guts, and something far worse, decay. We walked inside, the floor slanting downward. Broken furniture and slimy debris were everywhere, and in one corner, near an overturned table, we discovered a leather journal. The cover was moldy, the edges of the pages water-stained. The handwriting inside was dated 1978. One entry read, "I hear her voice at night. She calls me to the water. Everyone says to stay away, that she's been here for generations, feeding on those who wander too close. But I'm drawn to her. I'm losing myself." The final pages were frantic scribbles, references to a name Leona, and repeated mentions of a witch or spirit that seduced people, drank their blood, and left the bodies rotting in the lake. The writer claimed to have barricaded themselves inside the cabin to resist her calls. There was no conclusion, just half-finished lines. "She's here. She's here. I can't." I felt a chill run down my spine. Tara's eyes brimmed with alarm, while Jonah stood rigid, scanning the water. David acted like he'd struck gold. "This is incredible. People will eat this up," he murmured, snapping pictures on his phone. Jonah told us we'd seen enough. He insisted we leave, and for once, Tara and I agreed. David huffed but trailed after us. We returned to the campsite in silence. That evening, we were gathered around the fire again. Jonah cooked some beans, but none of us were hungry. There was too much tension in the air. Tara eventually crawled into her tent early, but I stayed up, restless. Jonah sat across from me, polishing his shotgun. "She's real, you know," he said quietly, glancing at the lake. "They call her a bruxa, or something like that. My abuela told me stories about this shape-shifting witch when I was a kid, but I never thought I'd see signs of anything like it here." I didn't want to believe him, but the journal, the rotting fish, the eerie silence, it all felt too strange to dismiss as coincidence. "Have you seen it?" I asked. Jonah shook his head. "I've heard noises on the water at night, found bones along the shore sometimes. This place has a body count. Good people disappear out here." I shuddered, glancing at David's tent. He was inside, editing footage, probably. I tried to push away the anxious thought that maybe we should leave that very moment. But a part of me worried we wouldn't even make it to the car if the drug dealers or something else was watching. I finally went to sleep. Sometime later, maybe a few hours, I heard a splash. Then footsteps on the dock. A muffled voice. Groggy, I stuck my head out of the tent. David's tent was open and he was gone. So was his camera. Jonah was already stirring. "Where's David?" he asked. "I think I heard him by the dock," I whispered. "He must have gone back to the cabin to film more." Jonah cursed under his breath. We woke Tara, who looked both furious and terrified. "He's insane," she said. "He's going to get himself killed." The three of us trudged down to the shore, flashlights bobbing over mossy rocks. The water was calm, black under the moonlight, and the half-sunken cabin was barely visible in the darkness. We followed the dock, bracing ourselves for the stench and the slick wood. Then we saw them. David and a woman in white standing in the doorway. She was tall, impossibly pale, wearing a threadbare dress that clung to her soaked skin. Her long, black hair dripped water onto the warped floor. David was speaking to her in low tones as though entranced. The woman, Leona, I realized, looked up at us. Even from a distance, I could see her eyes were pitch black. I felt my stomach twist. "David!" Tara shouted. "Get away from her!" He turned, and in the beam of my flashlight, I could see this manic, feverish gleam in his eyes. He raised his hand and, shockingly fast, lunged at Tara. Jonah fired a warning shot into the air. The sound was deafening, echoing across the lake. It made David hesitate for half a second, but then he attacked Tara with a strength I never knew he had. They crashed into the wall, water sloshing around their ankles. Tara screamed, trying to push him off. His face was twisted into something unrecognizable, almost animalistic. Jonah had no choice. He fired again, this time hitting David in the leg. David let out a howl and collapsed onto the wet floor, but Leona was already moving, silent as a shadow. She grabbed David by the arms, dragging him deeper into the flooded part of the cabin. Her eyes locked with mine, and in that moment I felt a pull, like she was beckoning me to follow. Every instinct screamed to run, but I was frozen. Jonah shouted, pumping another shell into his shotgun. He fired at Leona, but she vanished below the water, taking David with her. For a few seconds the water frothed, and then all was still, except for the echoes of David's screams replaying in my head. We stumbled back onto the shore. Tara was trembling uncontrollably, tears streaming down her cheeks. Jonah panted, every muscle tense. I stood numb, cold dread gnawing at my gut. "He's gone," Tara said softly. Jonah didn't say anything. He just lowered his shotgun, gaze locked on the water where David had disappeared. We returned to our camp unsure of what else to do. Tara demanded we leave immediately. Jonah and I agreed, but we had to gather our gear first. As we were hastily packing, Jonah stopped. "Wait," he said. "David's camera might have caught something, and if we leave it, others might come looking, or those drug dealers might find it." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to run, but the idea of leaving behind evidence of David's final hours felt wrong. We still had to call the authorities. Maybe they'd want the footage. So, in a grim haze, we trudged back to the cabin. We found David's camera half buried in the mud near the entrance, as though it had been tossed aside. But as we picked it up, Tara noticed a door in the back, leading to a basement we hadn't seen before. I desperately wanted to ignore it, but Jonah insisted we check. We had to see if David was still alive somewhere down there. We had to be sure. The basement was dark, the stench overpowering. I tried not to retch. Our flashlights swept over old stone walls and water stains. Then Tara gasped. In one corner there were piles of bones, human bones, some picked clean, some partially decomposed. Clothing scraps hung off a few, and the sight made my stomach lurch. On a nearby table, Polaroid photos were spread out, all water-damaged but still recognizable. Faces of men and women, children even, each labeled with a date. Some from decades ago, some recent. My eyes caught the year 2020. We realized we were looking at victims, a catalog of the missing. Tara covered her mouth, tears streaking her cheeks. She let out a choked sob when she found a necklace among the clutter. It was a delicate silver chain with a small charm. She told me it belonged to her cousin, who had vanished 2 years prior without a trace. She'd never believed the rumors that her cousin had run off. Now she had confirmation of a far more horrifying fate. My mind reeled. I wanted to scream, vomit, anything to release the horror clamping around my heart. That was when Jonah grabbed my arm and jerked his head toward the stairs. "We have to go," he said in a harsh whisper. We rushed back up, forcing ourselves to leave that grotesque crypt behind. But as we stepped onto the dock, flashlights bobbing in the murk, we heard voices behind us. Angry, hushed voices. The 2 armed men from earlier emerged from the trees. They must have seen us going in and out of the cabin. One aimed his pistol at Jonah, the other at me. "What did we tell you?" the taller one snarled. "We warned you to stay away." "We found something," Jonah said calmly. "Something monstrous in there. This has nothing to do with you. We're leaving." The shorter man, face twisted with fear or rage, spat on the ground. "You're lying. Nobody's supposed to be near our lab. Did you see it?" "No." Jonah lied. "We only checked this cabin for our missing friend. We're leaving, I swear." I don't know what might have happened next if a sound from behind us hadn't stolen everyone's attention. The woman, the Bruxa, stepped into the moonlight, eyes dark as pitch. The two men turned. One aimed his pistol at her, but in an instant she lunged forward with inhuman speed, knocking him off his feet. The other man fired wildly, the gunshots deafening in the still night. Jonah seized the moment to shoot at the second man, catching him in the shoulder. The man dropped his weapon, crying out. But just as Jonah turned to fire at Leona, the first man, still on the ground, fired back. Jonah staggered, a red stain spreading across his shirt. "Jonah!" I screamed. Jonah fired again, and the first man collapsed, a wet gurgle escaping his lips. But the damage was done. Jonah fell to his knees, shotgun clattering onto the dock. Tara ran to him, pressing her hands against his chest to stanch the bleeding. It was too much. We both knew it. Meanwhile, Leona wasted no time with the wounded man. She dragged him screaming into the water. The sound of his cries died quickly, swallowed by the lake's depths. I dropped beside Jonah, tears streaming down my face. He looked up at me, coughed, and grabbed my hand. "Get out of here," he whispered. His eyes flickered to Tara. "Save yourselves." Then his grip went slack. We lost Jonah in that moment. I wanted to sob, to grieve, but a new horror froze the tears in my throat. Tara had gone strangely still. She stood, eyes glazed as if in a trance. Her mouth fell open. From the water's edge, Leona's dripping figure reappeared, her dark hair plastered to her face, her lips curled into a predatory smile. She stared at Tara, and Tara began to move toward her like a puppet on strings. "Tara!" I screamed, trying to grab her arm. She turned on me with a feral snarl. Her eyes burned black like Leona's. She shoved me back, sending me sprawling. I felt rocks scrape my palms, but I scrambled to my feet. Tara lunged again, her face contorted with rage. She seemed stronger than she'd ever been, possessed by something vile. "Come with us," she hissed, her voice layered, echoing with something inhuman. "Don't you see? She will give us life forever." I felt my heart hammering in my chest. I loved Tara like a sister, but this wasn't her anymore. I pulled out the small switchblade I always carried, an old habit from when I used to travel alone. My hands shook as Tara charged. I slashed out wildly, tears blurring my vision. The blade caught her in the side, but she kept coming. She slammed me into the ground, knocking the wind out of me. Her hands closed around my neck, nails digging in, cutting off my air. Dark spots swam before my eyes. My lungs burned. In desperation, I managed to twist my knife and plunge it into her chest. Tara's entire body tensed. Her grip slackened. A crimson stain spread across her shirt. She collapsed on top of me, eyes reverting to their normal brown for 1 second, a look of heartbreak and confusion flashing across them. "Hannah," she whispered, blood seeping from her mouth. Then her eyes fluttered shut. I sobbed, cradling her as best I could, my mind reeling with shock, grief, guilt. A faint movement in the water made me look up. Leona stood there, motionless in the shallows, face twisted in an eerie semblance of triumph. She had claimed another soul. Then, as if bored, she sank into the dark water, disappearing once more. I wanted to lie there forever, but the cold realization that I might be next forced me to act. I slipped free from under Tara's lifeless form, inhaling a shaky breath of the putrid air. My entire body trembled. I stared at the cabin, the bodies, the water. If I stayed, I was dead. I ran. I don't remember much of the escape. I recall sprinting through the forest, flashlight bobbing, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. Every shadow made me jump, expecting Leona or the meth dealers or some new horror to snatch me. When I finally reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, my hand shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to fit the key in the ignition. I drove straight into the nearest town, if you can call it a town, just a cluster of houses, a gas station, and a diner. I burst into the small police station at dawn, clothes torn, face streaked with dirt and blood, raving about what had happened at Iron Fork Lake. The local sheriff, a man in his 50s, watched me with an expression of cold detachment. He took my statement down, then told me to wait. I sat there shivering under a thin blanket, sipping coffee that tasted like chalk. Eventually, a group of men in suits arrived. FBI, they claimed. They asked me countless questions. I told them about the remains in the basement, the Bruxa, Jonah being shot, the drug dealers, David's disappearance, Tara's possession. They scribbled notes, exchanged glances, and left me alone in a cramped interrogation room for hours. When they finally let me go, the sheriff walked me out. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder and said, "Forget what you saw. This place has a bad history." I stared at him, speechless. "What do you mean?" I managed. He didn't answer. He just turned and walked back inside, the door shutting behind him with a resonant click. A few days later, I tried to return to Iron Fork Lake with my own camera, determined to prove I wasn't crazy. But the roads were blocked off. Local officials claimed there was a toxic algae bloom, and the entire area was quarantined. No sign of the meth lab, no sign of the cabin. When I reached out to the FBI agent who'd interviewed me, I got the runaround. No record of any special investigation, no official statement on the bodies or the remains in that basement. Days became weeks, and my life unraveled. I told my story again and again, to reporters, to missing persons detectives, to anyone who would listen. They all came back with the same conclusion. David, Tara, and Jonah drowned under mysterious circumstances, and the 2 unknown men were never identified. That was it. Case closed. The evidence was gone, or inconclusive, they said. No one believed me. I became the girl who told ghost stories about a witch in the water, a conspiracy about the local police and the FBI covering it all up. My friends grew distant, the weight of my account driving them away. In my darkest moments, I questioned my own sanity, but I still had David's camera. The footage was damaged, mostly waterlogged beyond repair, but there were a few frames of the cabin, a faint figure in white near the doorway. It wasn't enough to prove anything. Months later, I heard rumors that a new group of YouTubers planned to visit Iron Fork Lake. They'd found the same stories David had. I tried to warn them. They laughed it off as a hoax, a marketing gimmick for their fearless exploration brand. I begged them not to go, but they blocked me, called me a troll. I know in my heart they never came back. They disappeared without a trace, and the local news chalked it up to a tragic accident. The lake, I suppose, claimed new victims. And somewhere in those dark waters, the Bruxa, Leona, waits, smiling at the next foolish visitor. That is everything that happened. I've told you the entire story, no matter how unthinkable it sounds. If you're reading this or hearing this, you're free to dismiss it as a delusion, a nightmare. But don't go near Iron Fork Lake. Don't listen to the call of that half-submerged cabin. People say that the truth will set you free. I'm not so sure. In my experience, the truth is a heavy burden, one that no one wants to believe. But I'm still alive. I escaped. And every night I wonder why she let me go. Sometimes I dream of that cabin, of Leona beckoning me from the water, and I hear Tara's voice begging me to save her. If you're ever tempted to test the legends yourself, think of my story. Think of David's last screams. Think of Tara's eyes turning black and of Jonah's dying breath. Because some nightmares don't end when you wake up. They're just getting started. That's all I have to say. My name is Hannah Moore. I'm 28 years old. And I wish this was nothing more than a cruel, twisted dream. But it's not. It happened in August of 2023, and I'll never forget it. I can't. Story 7. My name is Riley Dawson. I'm 26 years old. This happened in August of 2023, and it still haunts me every day. I first heard about Fuke, Arkansas, when my boyfriend, Mason Carter, suggested we spend a weekend there to explore the infamous Boggy Creek area. Mason was a thrill seeker, always on the lookout for something exciting or dangerous. He was 28, tall, confident, and sometimes arrogant enough to believe everything could be rationally explained. We had been together 2 years, and in that time, his appetite for adventure had dragged me across just about every remote corner of the country. I was cautious by nature, some might say anxious, but I'd picked up basic survival skills along the way to keep up with Mason's lifestyle. He roped in 2 others for this trip. Danny Ortega, one of his best friends from high school who had served a few years in the military, and my longtime friend Sarah Conway, who loved anything mysterious. Danny was 30, ex-military, and extremely capable in the wilderness. He brought a certain level of security. Sarah was 27, a fun-loving extrovert who could turn any tense moment into a joke. The plan was to camp deep in the swamp near Boggy Creek. Maybe spot some alligators, maybe scare ourselves with the local legend about a monster. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but Sarah was excited, and Danny's experience in survival made me feel a bit safer. We drove down in 2 cars on a sweltering, humid Friday afternoon. The roads leading to Fuke were flanked by thick pine forests and boggy land. When we finally rolled into the small town, it felt like a place that time forgot. Faded storefronts, sleepy streets, and the smell of fishy swamp water permeating the air. Almost immediately, we noticed a local sheriff's truck following us. Mason pulled into a gas station, and the truck parked beside us. The driver's door opened with a loud creak, and out stepped a gray-haired, barrel-chested man with a star on his shirt. He introduced himself as Sheriff Rayland Parks. "Y'all here for the monster?" he asked gruffly, as if he'd seen our type 1,000 times before. Sightseers, legend chasers. Mason snorted. "More like a weekend getaway," he said. "Just curious about the stories." Sheriff Parks studied us through narrowed eyes. "This place isn't a joke," he muttered. "People go missing out here. Stay in town if you know what's good for you." "Thanks for the concern, but we'll be fine," Mason said, dismissive. Danny just shrugged. Sarah gave a polite smile, and I tried not to let my anxiety show. Before climbing back into his truck, Sheriff Parks added, "You remember what I said if you venture too far. Stay safe." His words unsettled me, but I kept quiet. Mason brushed it off. "Just trying to scare the tourists," he said. We fueled up, grabbed some supplies from the dingy little station, and then headed out of town toward the swamp. The deeper we drove, the narrower the roads became. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with a red haze that reflected off the stagnant water in the ditches. My phone showed no signal. Typical of these remote areas, but it still made me nervous. When we finally found a decent spot to pull off near the water's edge, we parked and hauled our gear out. Thick cypress trees draped in Spanish moss loomed overhead. The humidity felt like a wet blanket on my skin. "This is it," Mason announced, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. "The perfect spot." Sarah gave an exaggerated shiver. "Feels creepy already. I love it." Danny grunted in agreement, but was all business, checking the perimeter for a good campsite. We moved about a mile from our cars, deeper into the swamp, until we stumbled upon a small clearing near an old, collapsed fence. A rundown cabin stood at one edge of the clearing, its roof half caved in, windows broken. It looked abandoned, perfect for Mason's idea of an authentic scare. We set up our tents close together, not too far from the cabin. By the time we built a fire, dusk had settled. Mosquitoes buzzed in thick clouds and the air smelled of rotting vegetation. Sarah was snapping pictures on her phone, giggling. Danny was methodical, laying out supplies, rope, first aid kit, a few hunting knives, and an old .38 revolver he always kept for emergencies. I found myself unpacking flashlights and insect repellent, trying to focus on busy work instead of my unease. Dinner was a simple affair, some canned beans and hot dogs over the fire. Mason was in high spirits, recounting the legend of the Boggy Creek Monster, while Sarah provided dramatic commentary. "So, they say the monster is like a huge, hairy creature," Sarah teased. "But some locals believe it's more ghost than beast." "That's just stories," Mason said. "But hey, I'll admit it's nice to have a good scare once in a while. Keeps the blood pumping." Danny stared into the fire. "I've seen enough weird things in my time," he muttered. "Sometimes the scariest thing you'll run into is other people." We soon found out he was right. We turned in around 10. The night insects raised a piercing chorus and a haze of swamp mist drifted across the clearing. I shared a tent with Sarah. Mason and Danny took the second tent. Exhaustion pulled me down quickly. Traveling always wore me out, but nerves kept me awake longer than usual. Eventually, I drifted off to the lullaby of frogs and crickets. A snapping twig jolted me awake. I glanced at my phone. It was close to midnight. Sarah was breathing steadily beside me. Outside, I heard a low murmur, like a voice. I lifted the tent flap just a bit, peering into the darkness. By the dying embers of the campfire, something moved. For a fleeting moment, I thought it was Mason, but it was too tall, too thin. It swayed on spindly legs, a shadow among shadows. I held my breath. Then the figure slipped away into the tree line without a sound. My skin prickled. I almost woke Sarah, but decided it was probably just my imagination or a trick of the moonlight. Telling myself it could have been a deer or some trick of the light, I lay back down, eventually falling into a restless sleep. In the morning, I found Danny examining strange marks on his forearms. 3 thin, parallel scratches. "What happened?" I asked. "I have no idea," he said, frowning. "Could be branches, but—" He didn't finish. As we discussed the scratches, Mason came bounding over. "Hey guys, found something," he said with forced excitement. We followed him around to the side of the cabin. There, in a patch of soft, muddy ground, we saw a cluster of bones. Some were still partly buried, while others lay scattered. They looked old, but not ancient, gnawed or broken in unnatural ways. Sarah's face went pale. "Are those human?" Mason prodded one with a stick and shrugged. "Could be deer bones," he said, but he sounded uncertain. Danny knelt, brushing away some dirt. He picked up what looked suspiciously like a human jawbone. No doubt about it. We all recoiled. Mason tried to rationalize it. "Could be some weird burial site from a long time ago, or an old animal bone that just looks human." He tossed the jawbone aside, refusing to acknowledge it might be real. No reason to panic. Sarah stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Are you serious? We need to report this or something." But we had no signal, no easy way to call the authorities. Danny placed the jawbone back where he found it. "We keep an eye out. Let's not do anything rash." We carried on that day, exploring the swamp on foot. The thick vegetation and mirrored water made it nearly impossible to keep our bearings. A couple of times, I thought I saw silhouettes moving in the distance. Once, it looked like the same tall figure from the night before. Danny noticed my distress and said we might be seeing poachers or illegal hunters. We heard gunshots echo faintly, which added weight to his theory. The real trouble came in the late afternoon. We came across a group of 3 men in camouflage gear. They had rifles slung over their shoulders, and the way they stared at us sent a chill through my spine. One of them, a wiry fellow with a scar across his cheek, sneered at us. Another, tall and broad-shouldered, spat on the ground at our feet. The third man, Jeb, had a lazy eye that never seemed to look in the same direction as the other. Jeb sized us up. "Y'all lost?" he asked with a drawl. Mason put on a friendly front. "Just out here camping." "City folk," the scarred man sneered. "You need to move on. This is our territory." Danny bristled. "We're on public land." They all shared a look that made my stomach clench. Finally, Jeb's lazy eye seemed to fix on Mason. "Keep to your own space, then. Don't wander around too much here." We backed off, returning to camp with an unsettled feeling. Mason tried to joke about it. "Just some backwoods hunters. No big deal." But Danny looked concerned. "They were scoping us out," he said. "They have something else going on." Sarah tried to lighten the mood by cooking dinner on the portable stove, but the tension hung thick. Over our meal, we debated whether to pack up and go. Mason insisted we stay, that if we let a few creeps scare us off, we were letting them win. Sarah was torn. She hated confrontation, but also came all this way for an adventure. Danny said we should at least consider moving to a different spot, but it was getting dark. We reluctantly decided to stay put for one more night. That decision cost us dearly. After the sun went down, the atmosphere shifted. The crickets and frogs went silent in waves, as though something passed through the swamp, silencing everything in its path. At one point, we heard a faint scream in the distance, too far to know if it was human or animal. The darkness felt absolute, pressing in on our small circle of firelight. We all stuck close, reluctant to wander alone. Around midnight, Sarah left to find a private spot to use the bathroom. I offered to go with her, but she waved me off with a grin and said, "I'll be fine, just over there, behind the trees." She never came back. We waited, first patiently, then in mounting terror. After about 15 minutes, Danny grabbed a flashlight and we all searched for her. We found her footprints leading into a small clump of cypress trees. Then, nothing. I saw her phone, face down in the mud, the screen cracked. There was a smear of blood on the corner. No sign of her, no footprints leaving the area. Mason yelled Sarah's name over and over, his voice echoing uselessly. Danny took the lead, scanning the nearby brush, cursing under his breath. I could barely breathe, heart hammering so loud I thought I'd pass out. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to focus on looking for any clue. We found broken branches, signs of a struggle. Drops of blood on a trunk at shoulder height, as if she'd been dragged. No footprints. Just the cloying smell of stagnant water and the faint stench of something rotten. Danny's jaw set in grim determination. He turned to Mason. "We can't split up. It's too dangerous. Riley, stay close." We scoured the area for an hour or more, calling out Sarah's name. Every rustle in the undergrowth made us jump. Eventually, we found a patch of blood on the ground, but Sarah was gone. Fear was etched into Mason's face. "Maybe it's those hunters," he said. "They might have taken her." "No," Danny said quietly. "I found this." He held up a small piece of torn fabric from Sarah's shirt. It was splattered with mud and something that smelled metallic. Blood. An animal might have. Suddenly, an inhuman shriek cut the night. It wasn't quite an animal roar, but it wasn't human either. We froze. The shriek repeated, this time mixed with a sound like laughter. My blood turned to ice. It sounded too close, like it was circling. We ran back to camp. Mason fired off a flare that Danny kept in his pack, illuminating the twisted silhouettes of cypress trees for a brief moment. In that flash, I saw a tall, gaunt shape perched on a low branch, staring at us with hollow eyes. Then darkness again. A thud made me jump, but when I swung the flashlight, the tree was empty. I wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but Danny insisted we wait for dawn. "We can't navigate the swamp at night," he said. Mason looked like he was about to argue, but then we heard more howling in the distance. We huddled together by the fire, guns drawn, flashlights in hand. "Sarah," I whispered, choking back tears. Mason had an arm around me, trembling as well. Danny kept scanning the darkness, eyes narrowed. Then we heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone was approaching. Mason raised his flashlight, and we saw the poacher Jeb stepping into the clearing. He had his rifle cradled in his arms, and he grinned when he saw us. "Y'all missing someone," he drawled. Mason stood up, gun in hand. "What did you do with her?" Jeb shook his head. "Ain't me you gotta worry about. You're trespassing. We got rules in these parts." Danny cocked his revolver. "Where's Sarah?" Jeb gave a low whistle. "I figure either the swamp or something else got her by now." The tension snapped. Mason lunged, pressing the barrel of his gun against Jeb's chest. Jeb didn't flinch. "Go on then," he said, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "But you'll be doing my job for me, which is rounding up city folk for my buyers." I felt my stomach twist. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, ignoring me, keeping his eyes on Mason. "There's a market out there. People pay good money for captives, and out here, no one finds the bodies." His grin widened. "Usually, that monster in the swamp cleans up after." Mason's face went pale. He stepped back. "What the hell are you talking about?" "We take folks like you. We hand you over to certain people. Traffickers, you might say. But lately, we've had competition. Something else gets to folks first. We lose our payday." Rage fueled me as I glared at him. "You're insane. Insane enough that you should be real scared." Jeb snickered, then turned suddenly when a branch snapped behind him. "You hear that?" he whispered. Even he sounded on edge. I spotted movement near the cabin. A tall, skeletal figure with sunken cheeks, black eyes reflecting our flashlights like marbles. Its limbs were unnaturally long, and it let out a low hiss. Jeb raised his rifle, but the creature, Elaxa, I would later learn, moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. With one leap, it struck Jeb, sending him crashing into the fire, scattering embers. He screamed, rolling away, desperately patting out the flames on his clothes. Mason fired 3 shots. The creature jerked, then twisted its head at an impossible angle and let out another shriek. Danny shouted, "Run!" We sprinted toward the trees, adrenaline pushing us forward. Jeb stumbled after us, but the creature caught him, yanking him back. The last I saw of him was his terrified face as he disappeared into the shadows, his scream cut off by a sickening crunch. We barreled through the swamp in blind panic. Tree roots snagged our ankles, mud sucked at our boots. Mason nearly tripped, and Danny hoisted him up. We heard that eerie laughter echoing, followed by more shrieks. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. Eventually, we paused to catch our breath near a half-submerged log. Gasping, I noticed a flicker of movement behind us. Danny whipped around, gun raised. 2 more armed men emerged from the trees, poachers, or the same ring. They aimed their rifles at us. Mason froze, dropping his gun, hands up in surrender. "Drop your weapons," one of them snarled. We did, powerless. They marched us deeper into the swamp. I felt numb, my mind racing between thoughts of Sarah's disappearance and the creature's horrifying presence. I kept thinking, we might be next. They're going to sell us or kill us or... The possibilities were too awful to dwell on. We reached a small clearing where they'd set up a rough camp. A battered pickup was parked on slightly higher ground. Guns, tarps, and ominous plastic containers were scattered about. The men shoved us to our knees. One started patting us down for valuables. Suddenly, the creature's screech echoed again, closer than ever. One of the men cursed and fired his rifle in the air. "Damn monsters here," he growled. "It's been circling all night." The tall man, who seemed to be in charge, looked around, sweat pouring down his face. "We need to move these folks. Buyers'll meet us by the old logging road." One of them yanked Mason to his feet. Mason, desperate, made them an offer. "We have money," he gasped. "If you let me go, I'll show you where our car is. It's got valuables, maybe a few $1,000s in gear." I stared at him, disbelief turning into cold betrayal in my gut. Mason wasn't even trying to negotiate for all of us, just himself. I felt tears prick my eyes. He was so terrified that he'd do anything to save his own skin. "You serious?" the tall man said, narrowing his eyes. Mason nodded furiously. "Yeah, just let me go, and I'll lead you right there." I opened my mouth to shout at him, but Danny shook his head, giving me a look that said, "Let him talk." Maybe we could turn the betrayal into a diversion. My heart was pounding. Was Mason truly abandoning us? Before the tall man could decide, the creature swooped in. I didn't see it clearly, only a flash of sickly white limbs and hollow eyes. It crashed into one of the poachers, dragging him into the underbrush. The man's screams turned into gurgles, then silence. Blood splattered on the cypress roots. Chaos erupted. Shots were fired wildly, muzzle flashes lighting up the swamp. Mason bolted, leaving me and Danny behind. The tall man tried to shoot after him, but the monster seized him from behind, snapping his neck with a hideous crack. I scrambled away, still bound at the wrists with a zip tie. Danny, also bound, slammed his shoulder into the last poacher, knocking him to the ground. The rifle flew from the man's hands. The creature lunged, jaws snapping. Danny shoved me aside and we half ran, half crawled away. Behind us, the monster finished the poacher with a wet, tearing sound. We kept going until we reached an old dirt path. My wrists burned from the zip tie as I struggled to break free. Danny managed to find a sharp rock and we sawed at the plastic until it gave way. Then we freed his hands too. Fear hammered in my temples, but I forced myself to keep moving. "Mason! He just ran!" I choked out, tears falling as shock set in. Danny didn't say anything. I think he was wrestling with his own anger. The betrayal was raw, but survival was more pressing. We stumbled upon an old, partially hidden bunker built into a small rise in the ground. The door hung open, rusted and creaking. Inside, we found rotting wooden shelves, empty crates, and a single working flashlight that flickered weakly. We also found something deeply disturbing. A crate filled with old documents and files stamped with FBI insignias. Danny flipped through them, shining the flashlight over typed pages. "They knew about disappearances dating back decades," he whispered. "All in this region. People vanish, bodies never found." He paused, eyes haunted. They tried to cover it up. The notes mentioned a Wendigo-like entity, and references to old Native American lore about cursed spirits that mimic voices, luring victims into the darkness. My hands shook as I read. One folder even referenced local authorities helping to keep the story out of the press. A few scribbled notes indicated higher-ups believed the creature should be contained, but local enforcement is uncooperative. Suddenly, we heard thrashing outside. We killed the flashlight. Holding our breath, we listened. The door to the bunker let a sliver of moonlight in, and in that faint glow, we saw a silhouette pass by. It paused near the entrance, sniffing or listening. My entire body stiffened. The shape lingered, and I could almost feel its hunger. Then it moved away. We exhaled in shaky relief. Danny clutched the old .38 revolver he'd managed to keep. We waited there for what felt like hours, silent, hearts pounding. Finally, we dared to emerge. The forest around us eerily quiet. We had to get back to the cars, but we also hoped we might find Sarah, or what remained of her. That guilt weighed heavily on me. By the time we reached our campsite, dawn was breaking. The place looked ravaged, tents shredded, gear scattered, and blood splattered across the ground. No sign of Sarah's body, nor any trace of the monster. We grabbed whatever supplies we could salvage. Flashlights, a first aid kit, and a small hunting knife. As we turned to leave, we saw something propped against the cabin wall. I had to clamp a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. It was Sarah, alive but in agonizing shape, missing an arm. She was leaning forward, eyes glazed, breathing shallowly. Danny and I rushed to her. She looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Riley," she croaked. Blood stained her clothes and her skin was deathly pale. She tried to say more, but only managed a trembling whimper. I held her face in my hands, tears streaming. "It's okay," I whispered, though it was a blatant lie. She was too badly injured. She coughed, flecks of blood on her lips. "It whispered your names," she rasped, then her eyes fluttered, going blank. I tried desperately to save her, but she was gone. I laid her gently on the ground, sobbing. Danny shut his eyes, whispering a prayer. We had no time to mourn properly. A shuffling sound made us bolt upright. The creature was near. We ran, keeping to the dirt path, eventually seeing a faint outline of the main road. Relief spiked my adrenaline, but that's when we heard an echo of footsteps behind us. Ragged breathing, a twisted voice that mimicked Sarah's final words. It whispered your names, bounced among the trees. Finally, we burst onto the road, panting, hearts hammering. Dawn light revealed Mason's car a short distance away. The driver's door was open, the engine still running. My stomach lurched. "Mason!" I yelled, approaching the car. The interior was splashed with blood. No sign of him, just torn pieces of clothing and scraps of flesh. I looked away, gagging. On the passenger seat, I saw his phone. The screen cracked. The keys were still in the ignition. "Let's just go," Danny said, scanning the edge of the forest. We hopped in, but the front windshield was spiderwebbed with cracks, and the passenger window completely blown out, maybe from a gunshot or something else. Danny tried to drive. The car rattled and squealed, the tires struggling against the muddy ditch, but we managed to get it onto the main road. As the sun rose, I remember tears streaming down my face, a mix of horror, grief, and grim relief that I was still breathing. About 2 miles down, we saw flashing lights, a sheriff's cruiser. My heart soared, thinking we were saved. But when Sheriff Parks emerged, his face showed no surprise at our state. He walked over calmly, eyeing the battered car. Danny and I stumbled out, pleading for help, telling him about Sarah, the creature, the poachers, everything. Sheriff Parks frowned, looking distant. "Let's get you patched up first," he said. We were ushered into his cruiser. I expected sirens, backup, something. Instead, he drove us slowly back to town without a word. When we reached his station, a small, shabby building, he led us inside. I noticed a black SUV parked out front with dark-tinted windows. Inside the station, 2 men in suits stood waiting. One was tall, with a stiff posture, the other bald and stocky. Sheriff Parks spoke quietly to them, and they nodded. Then the suits escorted Danny away without explanation. A wave of fear washed over me. "Where are you taking him?" I shouted, but they ignored me. I tried to follow, but the sheriff blocked my path. "You'll need to make a statement," he said, "but some things are better left forgotten." I realized with a cold, sinking dread that we weren't being rescued. We were being contained, just like the files in the bunker had suggested. This was a cover-up. They didn't want the story out. I glared at Sheriff Parks, rage and terror mixing into a potent brew. He gave me a level look. "You and your friends strayed into something you shouldn't have. Be thankful you survived." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "The official story will be that your group went missing in an accident. Flood, quicksand. Plenty of ways people disappear out here." My eyes stung with tears. "Why?" I demanded, voice shaking. "That thing is killing people. Why not stop it?" He sighed, looking older. "We've tried. It always comes back. You don't know what you're dealing with." A short time later, one of the suits returned and told me I was free to go. Danny was nowhere in sight. I asked if I could see him, and they simply shook their heads. My heart pounded. Was Danny gone? Dead? A pang of guilt and anger shot through me. They practically shoved me out the door. I stumbled into the sunlight, reeling from shock. They gave me a ride. One of the suits drove while I sat in the back seat, numb, mind racing. Finally, they left me at a local motel on the outskirts of town. I didn't bother asking questions. I knew they wouldn't answer. The man who dropped me off said, "We have your statement. Don't talk to anyone about this." Then he drove away. I checked into a room, locked the door, and sank onto the bed. I didn't sleep. Images of Sarah's mutilated body and the horrifying creature replayed in my mind on an endless loop. And worst of all, Danny's fate was unknown. Mason was almost certainly dead. We'd all walked into this nightmare willingly, brushing off the sheriff's warnings. In the morning, I decided I'd drive home and tell someone, anyone, what happened. But as I started my car, an old unmarked sedan pulled up behind me. I recognized one of the suits inside, a not-so-subtle reminder that I was being watched. I knew then, any attempt to speak out would be silenced. Terrified and disgusted, I drove away, tears burning my eyes. Even miles outside of Fook, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. My nerves were on high alert, scanning the rearview mirror constantly. At a gas station, I noticed the same unmarked sedan parked across the street. Eventually, it broke off, and I managed to reach the interstate alone. I tried to calm myself, turning on the radio for background noise. But after a few miles, I heard something behind me. A faint whisper. It was Mason's voice, or something trying to sound like him, saying, "Riley, don't leave me here." My blood froze. I nearly swerved off the road. Pulling over, I checked the back seat, heart hammering. Nothing was there, just an empty space. I sat there, trembling, tears streaming down my face, unsure if I was losing my mind or if that creature's mimicry could reach me even now. I wish I could say I went to the FBI or the media, but the local FBI presence seemed complicit, and no journalist would believe a story like mine without evidence. Everything we had was taken or destroyed. I'm telling this now only because I can't bear the weight of it alone. So, that's it. My name is Riley Dawson, and I'm 26 years old. This happened in August of 2023, in Fook, Arkansas. I barely escaped with my life. Sarah Conway is dead. Danny Ortega is missing. Mason Carter betrayed me in desperation, and I don't even know if he died quickly or if that monster kept him alive for a while. Sheriff Parks and some government suits made sure no official record would remain. But I remember. I see it in my nightmares. And sometimes, even when I'm wide awake, I swear I hear that twisted whisper behind me, calling my name in the voices of the dead. I've come to realize what's most terrifying isn't just the creature stalking the swamps of Boggy Creek. It's the people. Those who hunt humans for profit. Those who look the other way, and those who'll do anything to keep a secret. In the end, we discovered a horror that thrived in that place for years, possibly decades, and we found out how far people would go to hide it. And if you ever find yourself in Fook, Arkansas, or anywhere near that endless swamp, remember my story. Remember that there are real monsters out there, both human and otherwise. And if you're smart, you'll stay far, far away, because there are some places you just don't come back from. And for the ones who do, you're never the same again.
In addition, YouTube's algorithm prioritizes videos with many likes and subscriptions. So, if you enjoyed this video, please click the like and subscribe buttons to help more people see and know about this content. Thank you for watching and listening.